by two. Marauder, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by my Praetorian partner, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I am furious. How about you?
I'm good. I'm ready to take to the wastelands one last time. That's right. We are literally getting to the end of we're getting to the end of the Mad Max franchise. And we're going to go into the wastelands one more time for Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. I'm going to give this quick origin story of renegade warrior Furiosa before her encounter and team up with Mad Max. That's it for the blurb. Stars Anna Taylor-Joy, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Burke as Praetorian Jack. We'll talk about him. I want to call her Alia Brown as young Furiosa. Lackey Hulme as Morton Joe, and that could go on from there. There's actually quite a large cast actually, but yeah, this is it now. This is George Miller's fifth entry into this franchise. This feels very tied to Fury Road, obviously, because it's the prequel for Furiosa. It's the first prequel in the franchise. But the question is it going to be the last? Should it be the last? And is this the end of the Mad Max franchise? Julian, what are your initial thoughts then on Furiosa and Mad Max Saga?
Well, I mean, we'll see whether this is the last one. George Miller's not getting any younger, and this took, 9 years or something?
Yeah, he turns 80 either this year or next, so yeah.
Yeah, and the box office isn't great, so,
No.
To be perfectly honest, I was disappointed in this. And I think this is the weakest entry outside of the first. So as you know, I'm a huge fan of 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are all, roughly equivalent. I thought this was definitely a step back. And we've never had a Mad Max movie that took place over years. Doing so naturally involves more continuity, especially when you're meeting up with a film that you've already released. And I think that format, while I like breaking the Mad Max formula, obviously one of the joys of the Mad Max franchise is that every movie is different and unique. And so I'm glad that this is different and unique. I thought Chris Hemsworth was, a little disappointing. He does a fine job, but he doesn't have the gravitas of some of the other Mad Max villains. And I think that long time span lessens rather than accentuates the effect for me. And I'm very confused about continuity, even though this is taking that seriously. So
yeah,
what about you?
No, yeah, I know what you're saying. I did really enjoy the film. Again, like you, I didn't go in expecting Fury Road 2 because having done the full Mad Max retrospective, I am now quite comfortable and well aware that every film is sort of like, George Miller saying, I've got this new idea. I want to do something different. And as we have talked before, the continuity has actually been quite oddly tight yet vague in all of the previous films, especially the first three. Like, you're able to sort of tie those first three together. They have there's the sort of the nuclear bombs coming later on, blah, blah. And then Fury Road, there are different theories. Is it the same Max, but played by a different person? Is it the feral child, sort of, or is it somebody else that's heard a Max legend and is off, doing their own version of it? So, continuity is a little bit elusive, I think, for some of this sort of the franchise. And as you're right, this tries to lean into it. And it suffers from what many prequel films do, where it's like, oh, in that film that you really liked, there were several things that, the character does, has, mentions, and we feel that we have to sort of address all of them in this one film. And that kind of like, I think we've said it before, I feel that with, I think Solo is possibly the greatest example of how not to do that. Um, I think this does it better, and I think this adds things to it, but I do think it sort of struggles under its own weight of lore that it wants to introduce.
I think that's fair, and I think that there's so much going on, as far as tying up to the past of Fury Road, that yeah, there's so much going on. There's so many characters, but at its essence, right? I think this does work as its own movie. It's not a bad movie for sure. It's sort of fine, but I think as its own movie, it works fine as a sort of revenge movie. And then obviously setting up for Fury Road. I think that at its essence, this is a story about a sort of political fight between these three cities,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And the Dementus takes over Gastown and then takes over Bulletown, and wants to take over the Citadel, and they have a big fight, and um, the Furiosa sort of finishes it. It's there right at the conclusion.
Yeah.
None of that is reflected in Fury Road.
No.
So if this is a prequel to Fury Road, none of that is reflected in Fury Road. Fury Road has two other people in charge of those other two places. Wouldn't Immortan Joe have just taken them over, at the end of this movie? So I have a lot of trouble with how this movie ends as far as wanting to set up Fury Road. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. And we will get there because I think the Bullet Farmer is in Fury Road, as is the People Eater, who is made the sort of the leader of Gastown. But it feels to me we will, because I think the funny thing is with all this, because you're right, we are going to reach that. But I heard, and I'm stealing this from another podcast, the Now Playing podcast, because this is the point that they made, and I think it's kind of relevant and kind of funny. Whenever George Miller makes someone his main character, he automatically sidelines them. Like the first Mad Max film, although it has all these other characters, and Max is kind of central, but he doesn't really become Mad Max until the last sort of little bit. Even in like the Road Warrior, like he's there, but he's not at the peak of the conflict. It's between Humongous and the people with the oil and stuff like that. And then in 3, like he just sort of he isn't sort of propelling. We said it then, like he doesn't really propel the plot. He just sort of he gets involved in stuff and stuff keeps happening. And then the same with Fury Road with the Tom Hardy Max. And then this one, it's like Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. Like it's all about her, and then it's not all about her. It's about these. It's about Dementus and Immortan Joe, and she just happens to be a character in the wider machinations of the Citadel versus the Gas Town and the Bullet Farm. So yeah, it's weird that like Anya Taylor-Joy is the headliner on this, but she doesn't appear for like the first, I don't know, over an hour.
Well, her character does, just in a younger version.
Yeah, exactly. And I just thought so it's interesting that like that character Furiosa, it follows her, but it's almost like following her story to facilitate this wider story of oh, this is how the lore of these things happen. Like like George Miller wants to show more than just Furiosa's story.
Well, and that's something that we love about the Mad Max films.
Yeah,
That,
yeah, yeah.
he
I do
plunged
like it.
into, a world that feels like it has backstory, right?
Yes.
And so, the origin of this film and of the Wasteland, which is yet to be produced, but apparently is scripted, at least plotted out, is that they're both prequels to Fury Road. So those are all the sort of work that a writer does going in of knowing what's happened previously. In Fury Road, that helps flesh out the story. And so you have, them talking about Valhalla and all this kind of
Yes.
stuff. And, there's references to Gastown, there's references to Bullet Town, but you don't see them. Bullet Farm, but you don't see them. They just have representatives join the hunt for
Yes.
Furiosa. So you have the idea of this wider world and this wider mythology without really
Having to
showing
see it. Yeah.
Here, in showing it, I feel like almost all of those elements are lessened.
Yes, I agree.
And Gastown and Bullet Town look remarkably like small video game settlements. Like they don't look cool like Citadel looks. And the politics and the characters feel a little lessened to me. Just in
No,
my
I think.
opinion.
Well, no, I agree, and I think I do because I want to be clear. I really did like this film, and I'm gonna, I will defend certain elements of it. But there are elements in this film that you get glimpses of things, in a similar way where I'm like, I want to know more about that. So I think because this film focuses on, it almost does the thing that we've said that Mad Max films have never done before. So we
Right.
talked about the fact that the first film talks about that, there's the water wars and there's all this other stuff, and there's this wider global sort of conflict or this wider global crisis going on. Yet we're going to focus on this little sort of like this small area of outback Australia, and then this cop versus this biker gang, whilst this global crisis or this global collapse is going on. So we're not going to go see these big armies or anything taken on, and that's fine. And the same with what we said with Road Warrior, like, you learn a bit more, but it's never like, we don't see the global conflict. We hear about the nuclear weapons dropping and stuff, and the conflict in 3. So between Road Warrior and Thunderdome, there's all this wider stuff. Doesn't matter. We hear about it, but you're never going to see this stuff. And I think by sort of this film wants to give you that conflict that we've never seen by throwing you into the war, the 40-day war, and the lead up to that 40-day war, by having the politics of these sort of this tri-town or tri-settlement set up. And I think, okay, that's fine. You wanted to do that finally. You want to sort of you want to talk about the big conflict that seems to be sort of like, of the world that we're accepting. But I don't care because none of the other films have ever done that. I'm not that interested. For example, the bit where after way into the film, when Furiosa makes it back to the Citadel after losing her arm and the sort of the conflict with Dementus. Dark Dementus, as he calls himself at that point. And she wakes up and she's in that small cavern and she's got the maggots on her arm. And then there's all these limbs hanging up and there's a woman who's there and she's sort of rotting and stuff. And she lives under the Citadel. And I'm like, oh, I want to know about this. Like, this is like the undercity of Bartertown. Like, and that all it kept making me think of is I want to know more about the sort of how the social construct, the social sort of order of things works in within the Citadel. Not a Morton Joe and all that sort of stuff at the top is fine. I get how that works. I've seen how they get produce and stuff in their sort of area where they spray and stuff with all the water and stuff and the mister, and they give water every now and then. But how are these people down underneath surviving? Like, what kind of social order has sprung up out of it? Like, what weirdos and freaks exist in that? Like, again, like it sort of it wants to tell the big story, but when it gets into like the weird minutia, is when I'm actually more compelled by some of the weirdness of this story. And I'm not entirely engaged with the big story that's going on.
Well, and those sort of underlings of the Citadel, that was an open question in Fury Road too.
Yes.
And here we get a little more. They look a little more desperate, which I think is a bit of a continuity error. They look almost like zombies.
Mm.
Whereas they seem totally worshipful of the Citadel. I mean, maybe because they're asking for water, you can kind of explain it, but that their life remains an open question here, right? So that was not something that was explored.
Yeah.
But for me, the problems with this movie start right at the beginning. And again, I don't hate this movie. It's a fine movie. It's better than most movies, But right from the beginning, I don't think I ever really engaged in this. And so right at the beginning, you have these raiders who have found the green place, right?
Mm.
Which we know is where, Furiosa started from Fury Road. So, and you have these three raiders, and Furiosa sneaks in and bites through one of their gas lines. What happened with that gas line? The whole point of it is to disable one of but they're riding on the motorcycles.
Yes.
Um,
I love this whole opening bit.
So I'm very. I mean, I don't hate it, but I'm sort of thrown out. So tell me why you loved it.
Okay, so I thought it was great because it does a similar thing to Fury Road in that you're just thrown in. Like there's these two kids that they're trying to pick peaches or whatever, and you find out that Furiosa isn't a name given to her in the Citadel. That's literally is the name she was given from birth, but she has a sister called Valkyrie. So I'm like, okay, they've gone for kind of like cool names. They go for strong names in the green place or whatever. But then she sees those raiders and she goes to investigate and says to Valkyrie, like, stay back, don't be seen. And she goes to cut their lines. She's aware, she knows that they can't leave. They've found the place of abundance, as they call it. So she has to cut their lines. So throughout this whole thing, it then becomes a chase. Like they take her, and then Valkyrie is able to sort of like call on the people from the village. It becomes a chase movie. But they get to like the boundary of the place of abundance, and only two people go out. One of them, I think, is suggested as being one of the many mothers that we meet later in Fury Road, and the other is Furiosa's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole chase, and I kind of love the whole chase where it starts on horse, she catches up, takes the bike, and it keeps sort of escalating, and then she steals their clothes, and she's sort of like able to sort of integrate. So I thought she's really cool. Like she was a great character. And I'm like, okay, this is where Furiosa gets her kind of mentality from. But I actually liked, if you follow the logistics of it, she bites through the what's it like, the gas line at one point, and that bike cacks out. But there's three of them at that point, and so then one of them gets killed. So he just dumps the bike, takes the gas tank, disconnects it, steals another bike, and carries on. So
isn't that the second bike that? I mean,
possibly. I think he might even give up. He might even kill the other guy, but he definitely changes his bikes at that point. So
yeah,
the bike.
But that's during the chase.
Yeah.
So what I'm confused, and I like the chase too. Okay, so I like that chase too, and I like the sort of like desperate warrior women. Like there can be no survivors for this group that's found. My question is, what happened to if you bite through a gas line, that bike isn't going to last halfway to the Citadel, right? So.
Oh no! Okay, yes. So yeah, the work because he has it what he does. So if you notice, the first bike that gets taken out, because there's 4 to begin with, 3, 4. I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember the full numbers, but there's one gets taken out and it has a spare gas tank on it. And so this is what one of the things I really like about the chase is when people get injured, they never check on the person. They literally go to their bike and like, you've got better wheels than me. I'm taking your wheels, but I'm also going to take your gas tank. So what he's done is he's actually stolen the gas tank from the first motorbike. So when she knackers the line, he basically pushes her off and sort of like gets annoyed with her, disconnects it, keeps the tank because it's still got fuel in it, throws the line, but then shifts, and the one he took from the previous bike, he puts on the front of his motorbike and clips it in place and disconnects it. So they've almost got like a replaceable gas tank that they can just keep going, which is where she then
I
gets
got that.
frustrated. So yeah, so he's taken that from a
So
previous
what
bike.
happened to the bike that she bit the line through?
He carries on using it. He replaces the line because there's a
Oh, I didn't
pipe
see the
connected.
replacement of the
Yeah,
line.
yeah. There's a pipe connected to the gas tank that goes on the front. So he just replaces it and carries on, which is her frustration. He sort of laughs at her for it, and it's sort of like, and they
Okay.
carry on.
So I found there were little things even right away like this that I had trouble following, whereas I never had trouble following those things in Fury Road.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and they're minor annoyances, but I mean, it seems like I get that there's the sense of like the detail of a guy shot and he takes his gas tank and all this stuff. There's a kind of like focus on the mechanics in all the Mad Max movies, right? Of
Yeah.
like where it doesn't feel inevitable, but it feels like very down to earth and cool, and every little decision counts. But I thought right at the beginning, I was kind of thrown out. By the time they're leaving, I'm sort of like, wait a minute, what happened to that guy? I'm asking questions that I'm not used to asking in these
Mm.
movies. Um, and that just felt a little different to me. And then you see the trail being wiped away by the wind right away in
Mm.
CGI that, looked a little convenient, cheesy for me. Because of course I'm wondering about the tracks,
Yeah.
and they sort of address it, but when they want it to be wiped away, it's wiped away by the breeze, and so yeah, I mean, the other thing I want to point out as a gripe right away is that when you're talking about continuity, right? Okay, so she was Furiosa from the beginning. The warrior women are good sharpshooters. She was never really trained as a sharpshooter, but she took it up and was a sharpshooter in
Mm.
Fury Road. Okay, all right, good enough, fine. In any prequel, there are things that they learned and things they didn't, and whatever. I mean, okay, fine, um, but the depiction of the green place is of a valley,
Mm-hmm.
a crevice in the rock that is green, and it looks very much like the sort of green place with the Lost Boys in Mad
3.
Max 3 at
Yeah,
Thunderdome,
yeah.
which I kind of want it to be, right?
Yeah.
Like, I kind of dig that, but that depiction is 100% incommensurate with the depiction of the green place in Fury Road, where
Yeah.
it's a swamp and there are no rocks.
Yeah.
So
I did
instantly
think
I'm
the
like,
same. I did think the same.
so
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like a continuity error, and I don't know.
No, I agree with you on that. And that's a gripe actually that I would actually bring up again in some of this because I agree. And I think we know George Miller's loose approach to certain things, and I'm fine with that. But if you are going to do a film that is a prequel and is going to expand on lore, then a key element of that is your continuity has to be tight. It has to, because that's the sort of kind of thing. And I feel that because these are originally were supposed to be filmed back to back. I've heard all this other stuff, and they were going to do a de-aged Charlize Theron and all this other stuff, right? Whatever. Not as the child, I should just say, just the feature.
But the Anna Taylor-Joy version,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's right. Although this feels like a follow, this does lead into Fury Road, and you can watch this and then watch Fury Road, and I think it would hang together relatively well. There are still elements where I'm like, that doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't fit. There were bits within the film, and parts of it is silly stuff. Like it Richter's, for example, played by Nathan Jones, who is a seriously, imposing figure. And in Fury Road, he's a big dude, really muscular, proper cut, right? But he was already getting on. He was in his mid to late 40s by that point. I think so it's 9 years later now, and to hold that level of muscle mass at when you're his age is more of a problem. And he doesn't look as defined or as big in this film, and so you're like, oh, I recognize that it's Rictus, but he kind of put me off. That I was like, oh, this is clearly an older Nathan Jones playing a younger Nathan Jones. So there was those things that I think bothered me. But the other one is there's a brother missing.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I mean, so he has a brother in this named
Yeah.
Scrotus, right?
Yes.
So, God, so I know the answer to this.
Yeah.
Would you like? So the answer is Scrotus was in the Mad Max video game
Yes.
that is a prequel to Fury Road, and
He went off to become his own warlord, didn't he, or something?
yeah, and so, but the thing is, this movie, and not to jump to the ending, which I found incredibly painful and frankly, amateurish.
Mm.
Sort of leads directly into Fury Road, except there are two brothers here. They're both alive at the end.
Yeah.
One is missing from Fury Road, and in Fury Road, there's a completely different political setup. Clearly, lots of time has passed between this and Fury Road, except it hasn't. Apparently, I mean, the amount of things that happen in like the 40 days prior to Fury Road are utterly incommensurate with Fury Road.
Well, let's wait for this because I know what you mean,
Yeah.
and I had to think about it in my head. But I want to get to that point about the passing of time in this film and how it is depicted in sometimes good, sometimes terrible ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are right, and I think that that I don't think that the evidence or the demonstration of the passing of time from, let's say, the end of the film to the, I don't know, whatever you want to call that sort of little snippet that would lead into Fury Road, and like the timescales of all those things is an issue. But let's jump back to the beginning, and we'll because I think
Scrotus is a problem, right?
Scrotus is a problem.
And
the lack of the other brother, the small the little person in the chair and stuff, never mentioned, never appears, never acknowledged. And I'm like, okay, well, where'd that one, where did he come from? Like, how does that work? So there's no explanation of that. So there are areas where the continuity is loose. Now, I'm going to suggest something when we get to the end that kind of it's not an explanation. It's not a good explanation, but I'm going to throw it out there. And
let's just start with the premise. We'll get there, and I want to hear it. But let's just start with the premise that this is a prequel to Fury Road, in which the family of Immortan Joe and even the basics of how that works, and how that hierarchical structure works, is totally different here in a incommensurate way with Fury Road.
Yes.
Okay. So
I agree. Yes.
So we have the chase.
Yes. So you have the chase, and there's always this stuff, and but Furiosa as a child is taken, and then she is presented to Dementus, and we get our first glimpse and introduction to Chris Hemsworth as Dementus. Even from the trailer, this was an oh no kind of feel to me, and I have an odd relationship, I've realised, with Chris Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth likes to be funny. He thinks he's a character actor, and he's not. And I think he's even more recently and I wonder if this film may have something to do with it. He recently apologized for Thor: Love and Thunder, saying, "Yeah, we got carried away. We went into the whole thing. It was going to be funny. We were going to do this, going to do that, and it got became this thing." Fine. So he was like, it got away from us basically. I think there's a part of me thinking he's preparing for the backlash to this film, maybe, because you're right in what you've said. Tina, let's go back through he's the closest comparison would be Humongous, but even Humongous felt threatening in a kind of, he was an imposing dude. He was weird. They had that sort of like barbaric yet kind of free loving kind of biker society that backed him up, and everyone backed him up. Everyone backed Humongous. Humongous was the man. and but he
And
was,
he says weird threatening shit, but you don't see him very much. So
yeah,
you can just imagine that he's super imposing. Here, Chris Hemsworth has, 45 minutes of screen time or something.
yes. Well, yeah, so I was actually more can make it, because I think the comparison would be, oh, Immortan Joe, and you're like, again, it doesn't kind of work as a comparison. So I was like, well, the only other comparison you can make then is Tina Turner in Thunderdome as like, oh, the leader of a society and da 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 da. Even then, and this is weird to say, Tina
I
Turner,
know.
that they limit Tina Turner. She as Auntie Entity, she's more interesting. There's
Agreed.
things left as a mystery, and but she has moments where you're like, oh, there's a history there. There's something that's gone on. I don't need to know. We even speculated, like, well, she's clearly like an American, like an African American in Australia. Like, what was she doing there? There's all this other stuff, but it was great, and I think she's really good. Dementus, like even his voice and all this other stuff, it feels like Chris Hemsworth doing a bit
Yeah.
throughout the film. And one of the things I'm really disappointed by with him, like he's a big guy. I think I've watched films like Extraction and 12 Men. He's done all these films where I'm like, where he's done war films and other stuff, and he's good, and he can do dramatic and stuff. And then I watch this, and I'm like, stop trying to be the weird character actor. You are not Daniel Day-Lewis. You can't do this stuff. Stop it. Just be you and be you good. Like, I don't know if you've seen, there's a film called at the Royale, I forget what it's called now. It's a film that was basically sort of like
Like
there's a
Fast Times at the El Royale or
that's
something.
it, something like that, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a motel and he ends up playing like a cult leader in the 70s and there's other stuff. He's better in that as a sort of playing that sort of kind of cult leader of a group of sort of, in a sort of like a Manson kind of way than here. And I'm like, you should have tapped into that. Go for that
Mm.
rather than this. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be like a pastiche on like Trump in sort of like, oh, the buffoon that leads. I don't know. But he feels buffoonish. And so throughout it, I'm like, I can't take you seriously. All the villains in the past have been crazy or sinister and threatening and weird, and have worked. Dementus never feels threatening to me at all. He feels like kind of like a silly joke.
I agree with you 100%. And I think that Chris Hemsworth is hamming it up,
Yeah.
but he wants to kind of both ham it up and be imposing and scary. He never feels imposing. He doesn't have full control over his troops, unlike most Mad
Mm-hmm.
Max villains. That's more like Tina Turner. But Tina Turner seemed calculating as
Yes.
anti-entity, right? She seems smart and calculating. He just seems, Dementus just seems kind of um, like a parody of a tough guy,
Mm-hmm.
who really is making it up as he goes along and knows he's making it up as is going along. But like, that could be interesting, right? A sort of like
Negan.
Baron of the Wasteland who sort of like knows he's not the best, but knows that hard things are required. But he neither seems smart enough nor really um what's the word? Like he
Brutal enough.
believes his well, brutal enough, but he does brutal things. But
Mm.
he says these kind of like aphorisms that never come off, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's like those belong to a different damaged psychotic character than what we're seeing. What we're
Yes.
seeing is just kind of like a dandy of the wasteland almost, who also does brutal stuff and also says weird aphorisms. It's almost like a cardboard version of a Mad Max character or
No,
something.
the character that came to my mind, and I've made those comparisons to the Mad Max villains, but he's basically like a second fiddle Negan from The Walking
Okay.
Dead. And I think one of the differences is that your first introduction to Negan, especially in the TV show, and I'm going to stick to the TV show because I think that's the better known version, is brutal.
Right.
It gets built up like you have an entire season where it's sort of like, we are, I am Negan, we are Negan, whatever. Like, what the hell is Negan? So then when you are introduced to the character and that final episode, he has the baseball bat with the barbed wire and stuff on. and he, spoilers for Walking Dead, but and he clubs Glenn to death. You're like, oh, this guy is crazy because he has those same sort of mannerisms and aphorisms as you say. Like he'll say, like, he quotes things and he's a bit sort of like, he has that drop shoulder and it's all like, damn, and all that kind of shit. Like he's doing all this sort of flamboyant stuff, but you're also terrified of him because you're not entirely sure that that baseball bat's not going to swing around and take your head off next. Like you're constantly like, oh, this is why he's in charge. Like he has a plan. He knows he's not the smartest and everything, like that, but he has a plan, and he knows he can physically back it up, and sort of people are happy. He's built this around him. With Chris Hemsworth, at no point do I ever understand why, like the Octoboss, who I think is cool as hell, why is he following Dementus? I don't know. The other part, I'm just going to throw it in as the other thing is there's this teddy, even on his costume, there's this teddy bear, and you see that he gives it to to Furiosa, and it's sort of like, have this. He talks about him having lost. Well, he doesn't even say it; he says it later on. But like, you get this. It's sort of drop line of like he lost his family and he had these kids and this other stuff. I'm like, okay, so you're supposed to be a grieving. Is the grief driven you to this? And so you're like, well, the world is hopeless, and so I'm going to act in this way. In that case, then you need a scene where like all this pretense falls away and you see the true person underneath with somebody. Like, he needs to share that. He needs to share that with Furiosa.
Yeah, right.
There needs to be a scene where
like I'm playing a part here. I'm playing this crazy guy who's doing terrible things.
Yeah.
I know this is necessary, but this
survive.
belongs to someone who cares about me, who I cared about.
I used to be this, I used to be that, and now I'm this. That would then make the line that he says later on when he takes her and Praetorian Jack and says, you made me the Dark Dementus. And it's like, that would have so much more weight if he said to her in the past, like, I don't want to have to do some of these things, but this is how it works now. Like, this is what the wastelands are. And I do feel like there's a scene missing where that all falls away, and it's sort of like, you can't have crazy all the time. Even with a Morton Joe, like you had all the crazy, but you saw the vulnerability when they were like putting on his costume, and you saw these other bits, and it was like, oh, this is kind of complex with how he deals with things. But
you know what I thought watching it was, I thought of Caligula, and sort of like the 2000 AD version of Judge Caligula.
Yeah.
And the sort of like arbitrary rule of somebody who's crazy, but he's not arbitrary nor crazy enough. And I thought like somebody else, like Tim Curry, could have played a camp version of this and gone full camp and just been scary and intimidating and had the charm and charisma that you would understand why people would follow him. But Hemsworth kind of can't get there. He's never really scary to me.
No.
I feel like I could totally reason with him. And he, despite being a giant guy, he doesn't really seem physically imposing. It's an interesting choice. It's one of those classic, sort of, idiosyncratic choices that he's got the teddy bear who's in bondage gear, strapped to his groin. By the way, I'm not sure what his relationship was with his daughter, but okay. But I agree with you. It's kind of like a mishmash of these ideas. And I thought of, if you're going to go Caligula, go full Caligula,
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, again, they go in the face of this, that when he takes Gastown and they accept it. And again, you have the crazy during the negotiation. Like he takes Gastown, he takes the lead, this bearded guy who is the previous leader of Gastown. They go to the Citadel, and he's got like this massive spring-loaded spike at the back of this guy's head. And to stop it from being ripped away from him, he's got it bolted to his nipples. And you go, all right, fair enough. But then Rictus or Scrotus, I think Scrotus actually grabs it from him, and in doing so, he lets go. The spike goes through the other leader's head. But you get this like 2-minute thing of like how it's ripped out some nipple piercings from Dementus, and he sort of, he makes his jokes about, oh, it felt so good, I was distracted for a minute, and you're going like, yeah, cool, we've already got that with like the people eater who sat there with his nipples pierced, stroking them. So, well, that's not weird enough then to compete with that. So he's never weird enough to make me feel uncomfortable in the same way that
Mm.
he feels like a pretender. Like when he stood next to like a Morton Joe in his full costume and the breathing mask on, and the people eater with his bronze nose and his nipple piercings, and the bullet farmer who's wearing like a costume made out of bullets and stuff, and you're like, you don't feel as ludicrous as them.
Hmm.
So you're not that, so you've got to be something else. And he never kind of picks another lane to be anything. But when Praetorian Jack and Furiosa come to Gastown later on, and he's like, everyone's revolting, and there's this whole sort of thing then, and he helps
Right.
them get out. He sort of takes them on a route round it so they can come back out on the gate. Again, I'm like, he seems angry. He's like, there's got to be a thing of the warlords. He feels desperate
Hmm.
because he's failed. And I'm like, okay, that shouldn't be Dementus making that statement. It should be one of his underlings. And Dementus should still be up in his tower, as you said, like Caligula, was it almost for another Roman emperor, almost like Nero, playing his fiddle as sort of Gastown burns, ignoring it, but everyone else going like, we need to have that meeting, like we want to figure this out, kind of thing. It always feels like, yeah, he's never fully in control or in charge. And so when you see those massive hordes, and some of the shots, so there's some CG in this that doesn't quite work, but there's some other shots that are fantastic. But when you see that there's like hundreds of bikers
Hmm.
following Dementus, you go, that's amazing. Why are they doing that?
Yeah. Well, to get back to that scene of the meeting of Dementus's people and Immortan Joe for the first time.
Mm.
At least the first time upstairs, right? Where
Hmm.
they're invited upstairs. Um, where he's got that spike. That spike is cool, right? But he
Hmm.
wants to get his underling to take the spike because he's been holding it, and it takes a lot of pressure to keep this held.
Yeah.
And then there's a scuffle, and it snaps. And it comes off like he is quite a pretender, right? And you're right
Mm.
that he does not seem as imposing as the others. It's costume design is part of that, but also it seems like, oh, this is a plan that's gone awry, right? You've just
Yes.
killed,
Yes.
somebody who's important to Immortan Joe. The plan has gone awry. This is, not calculated. You're just a guy trying to make it work. And I think that is the version of Dementus that I find most interesting, or closest to the through line of his character, as a guy who's been through some hardship, has assumed control, is able to do these, terrible things, to be calculating, except he doesn't really do that many terrible things, and he isn't that calculating. He seems
Mm.
rather inept. And
But yet he keeps doing things. And that's the thing, like
yes.
he's shown to be sort of like he's buffoonish, yet he takes Gastown. Like he fails to take the Citadel. And we'll talk about I love that scene. And there's a great
Yeah.
that's a great contrast.
You mean the
Um
first scene where he goes to the Citadel,
and he's
right?
basically sort of
Yeah.
and he speaks them all, but we'll jump back to that in a minute. But he manages to take Gastown and become the leader of
Hmm.
Gastown, and they give him that and stuff. They negotiate that, but then he manages to take out the Bullet Farm as well
Hmm.
later in the film, and I'm still going like, you, how
And
did
he's
that
got
happen?
designs on the Citadel, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like, he's insanely aggressive for a guy who is like, seems like he's just a kind of buffoonish kind of guy who's holding it together with duct tape.
but that's it. Like his plan seems to be, well, once we've got this, it'll all be okay. Like once we control everything, it'll
Hmm.
all be okay. And that's fine. But you never have, the Octobos leaves, which is why you get you find out that one of the gangs has left, and they do acknowledge. They do acknowledge. I think the People Eater even says it at one point. Like he's barely holding his this sort of like conglomerate of gangs together. Like no one respects him. So you go, okay, cool. That's interesting. Then is he panicking? No? He seems constantly sort of like barreling his way through it, and so I get kind of bored of it by the end. Where I'm just like, yeah, right. This is just Dementus is not that. We had this sort of montage of a 40-day war later on, and I was like, cool. This guy loves a
Kind of.
microphone.
Yeah.
I was like, cool. Are we going to get like a humongous kind of
Hmm.
nod where I'm going to get him spouting stuff? No, and I was just like, oh man, this feels kind of disappointing. Where I'm like, Humongous would have just shot him in the face and sort of like rolled over him and carried on, like um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So sort of to sum up on Dementis, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that he seems wildly ambitious, but he seems like he's not holding it together, and he's neither calculating enough nor cruel and savage and unique enough for me to really understand why they're following him, or to really feel that, to really feel the weight of the stakes. He seems like this sort of like usurper character who got
mm,
lucky,
yeah,
and but as you say, says all these cocky kind of things, and then at other times doesn't seem cocky. I mean, I cannot really understand his character, and he seems like the worst of the Mad Max,
he
you
is.
know, villains
Yeah.
outside of one, right?
No, no, I disagree. I think Toe Cutter is better
Hmm.
than I think Dementus is the worst Mad Max villain. He's the least consistent. I have no idea of why people follow him. You know, at one point later on, you find out that they're draining blood from Furiosa so that they can make blood sausage for him. And there's other things,
Hmm.
and you go, cool, all right. So he's got cannibalistic, intents as well, so he can get the protein, so he can be all big and buff. Cool. Can we lean into that then? Is that going to be something like? Are we going to find out he has other cannibalistic content, like sensibilities? We don't know. We never learn any of this stuff. And again, he's not a deep character. I've heard other people going, "Oh, he's a really, this is clearly a complex
Hmm.
villain." He's not, and he's not even
I
presented as a
agree.
complex villain. He's comedic at best, and I blame again. I think I blame Hemsworth for it, and I think his performance should be darker and you know up and down. He just feels up here all the time. Like there never feels like an off switch. He just be like, "Shut
Well,
up, just shut up."
and this is going to be a big problem for the climax, which we'll get
Yeah.
to eventually.
Yeah. But in contrast, I think this film really builds up Immortan Joe. Like this film is so focused on building up at times, building up and showing you how calculated and in charge Immortan Joe is. And it does come to like there's several scenes in this. There are several scenes in this film that I love for different reasons. And one of the first ones is when Hemsworth's Dementor sort of first comes to the Citadel because they've come across. We'll jump a bunch of other stuff, but basically they come across this war boy. He's been injured, and they keep talking about this place of abundance. They're obviously talking about the green place,
Hmm.
and he says, "I love when they say because he says, oh, am I in Valhalla?" And they're like, "What? What are you on about?" Um,
No, that's cool. Yeah, and
yeah,
he's got an arrow through his
yeah,
head.
yeah. So there's some great moments like that. But then he says, "Well, if you want abundance, there's this place called the Citadel. I will take you." And so they all ride up, hundreds of bikers, and basically, Dementor says to the populace, "Rise up and take over." And then but then sees that they're all sort of these scabrous, sort of like animalistic peasants. But then he challenges Immortan Joe, and you've got all the war boys up on the lines. And he says, "No, no, no, you not all of them. Choose one." And he does. They
Yeah.
choose one. And then Morton Joe just sort of says, says, "There is a place in Valhalla for you." And that guy just sort of slides down and then just releases. He says, "That's one of
He's a
900."
suicide bomber.
He's a suicide bomber.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he's like, "That's one of 973 men that will die for me at my command."
Great scene. I agree.
Amazing.
Great scene. Yeah, I love that bit. And you're right. It builds up in Morton Joe. It
Yeah.
builds up the Citadel's threat. If anything more than Fury Road does.
Yeah.
The only problem I have with it is again back to Dementis, where they just wind up running away.
Yes.
And so Dementis, is lessened by the encounter and doesn't seem like he regrouped and came up with a strategic plan after that. He's still winging it. So it makes me think less of Dementis even more than I already did. But you're right. I
Yeah.
love that scene. That is
Yeah.
one of the best scenes.
Because it shows you how they've got the defenses for the Citadel because they've got all the hooks and all this other stuff and all the bikes are being pulled up. And you're right. I mean, Dementis' group gets decimated. Um, it's great. I think it really works really, really well. But it introduces this stuff because you're right. He does. He wings it, doesn't he? Because then they're like, oh, if we can't take, because they tried to take Gastown and stuff. And they end exactly right. He says he gets one of his not one of his actually, it's wrong. He basically grabs a guy, gets a bunch of dirt or whatever the clay is, and starts slathering it on one of the guys because they're going to pretend to be war
This
boys
is for the taking of Gastown,
for the
right?
taking of Gastown. So you're right, and that two things that's noted from that, as you say, is he is just making it up as he goes along because it's just a plan that spouts into his head, and even the initial plan doesn't work. They have to
Mm-hmm.
change the plan. But it's the fact that the guy says to him, "I don't listen to you. I listen to the Octoboss," and the Octoboss goes, "Yeah, right,
Right.
whatever. Go along with it." Um, and then they take the war rig, don't they? And the first war rig. No,
No. It's just a gas thing,
yeah,
right? I think at that point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they
Well,
pretend to be war boys, and then they're like, this. It looks like they're faking the attack on this truck,
right.
and so Gastown's like, yeah, we're not opening this up, and so he has to start unleashing on his own guys, and you can see the Octoboss is like, I'm not happy with this. This is not what we
Oh, yeah,
planned.
he clearly says that, like, you
Yeah,
bastard,
yeah,
Yeah, so Dementus is, lacking in scruples, right?
yeah.
That's repeatedly ground into you. But again, it's not based on any kind of plan. I mean, I did kind of like that scene. I mean, the sort of taking of Gastown strategy. Um, but to get back to, when Furiosa is captured as a kid, and then, her mother sneaks in and, saves her, and then they have this, this rather, to me, rather stupid bit where, why did they just not leave? Is it just that, they're being tracked? I mean, you know, the mother says to Furiosa, "Get away! You have to escape," and then she makes a last stand to kind of, draw extra time. She's so clever. They're such badasses.
Mm.
Why does she have to make this last stand?
I don't know. I agree. I don't know that bit. I thought it would be like, if it was going to, she needed enough time for the tracks to be covered or something like that. But
It's something like that.
but
But
but it's not made clear.
and they're so resourceful. You think they would come up with something else.
Mm.
And then Dementus has the mother, and Dementus crucifies her, right? And
Burns her feet.
Furiosa gets
Mm.
captured, and and so she's that whole scene of crucifixion is it struck me as it didn't work for me. It struck me as okay, but she's sort of crucified, but she's got this fire underneath her, and Dementus is standing in front of her, and it's sort of framed like he's raping her
Hmm.
with an object or something. Except it's never stated. It never like it seems like oddly tame. Even like the fire seems like weird CGI that's not really burning her. Like you know, I know the point is Furiosa watched her mother go through this, and hates Dementus as a result. But it seemed oddly tame to me, oddly kind of fake.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a the one of the things that stood out in Fury Road is the practicality of things. Like they held up like the practicality of the stunts and all this other stuff, even the fire and things. I think 9 years later they're a bit like, we're not doing that anymore. Like we can't get away with that. So I think there's a lot of enforced CGI on this film. That includes fire, that includes dogs for several scenes, um, and things like that. Where I'm like, okay, that's almost enforced CGI, and yeah, everything feels smaller in that respect. Like it's not like exactly like the Tree of Woe or anything like from Conan. It's nothing like that. Where I'm a bit like, okay, this feels it feels going back to that idea of Negan, like it never feels like I'm going, this is the guy that's sort of like ruling through intimidation and, um, maliciousness or and calculation. It just sort of feels a bit thrown together. Um,
And it should feel bigger, right? Because it
yeah,
spans a bigger span of time. It spans a bigger number of settlements, a bigger stretch of the wasteland. I mean, this should feel like a big epic. It's the word saga's in the title, right?
but
And
and it's
instead,
even one of the final lines that Dementus even says at the end of the film. Do you have it in you to make it epic? And I'm going, there is a little part of me going, yeah, you sort of did in bits, in others you didn't. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I agree. It does feel kind of small. On that point, actually, and I want to say because I think this goes throughout, and I noticed it a lot in that opening chase, and in this bit with the torture, because there's a bit where young Furiosa sort of like gets off the bike and runs into the group of bikers and stuff, and it will persist throughout. One of the things that was used in Fury Road in a stylistic sense was the speeding up and slowing down of
Hmm.
the film. I find it's more noticeable here in certain sections, but it's used in a different way that really made me not go back to Fury Road, but actually go back to like Road Warrior. Like it felt, I don't know, there was a different feel to some of it. Like some of the zooming
Hmm.
in on like people's faces when they're in the cab of a car or when they're running or something that's clearly sped up. It felt closer to like the feral child in Road Warrior or something out of something like that rather than the sort of dreaminess of Fury Road.
Yeah, and Fury Road, everything feels claustrophobic.
Hmm.
Even when they're out on the plains, it feels like all the shots are super claustrophobic and people are maneuvering around the war rig, and it just feels like everything is tight. And
Mm,
even when it's sped up, it's these close-up shots that are sped up as they're even in the chase as he's Mad Max is jumping over the car, and everything feels tight and constrained in some way. And here everything feels open. And those
mm,
shots that I liked are shots, that are like drone shots of the
mm,
landscape. And I like a lot of those shots, but I think the way partly it's the design work, but the way it's done makes me feel like sort of like I'm watching a video game. Like, oh, there's Gastown, and it looks like a video game design, right? Or there's this and there's that. There's more of a sense of geography. And I mean, that's fine. It's sort of setting up the space more, but I don't know. It feels lesser somehow. It doesn't feel in love with those landscapes the
yeah.
way I wanted to.
Well, there are scenes in this film where you go, "Oh, that was shot outside,"
Hmm.
and then there's a scene shortly after where you go, "Oh, that was shot on green screen."
Yeah.
Like literally back to back. And it reminded me of, in several cases, older films. And that's what, maybe that's why I had this sense of like older films watching this was, when you used to watch a film and you'd be like, oh, that's filmed outside, and then stepping on a set and you go, well, that film grading looks entirely different.
Hmm.
It felt like that in several instances where I'm like, oh, that feels like you're outside and that's filmed on a set. And then there'll be like two shots
Yeah.
later where they'll be in the Citadel or doing something else, and you go, "Oh, that's clearly on a set or on a green screen or something like that." And so it sort of shifted slightly between scenes where I was like, "Okay, the film grading or there's something in this that feels, off." And I don't know if it's like the color saturation or something
Hmm.
else. I don't know, but yeah, I agree that it feels oddly off-putting at times. And that film, the bit where she is being crucified,
Yeah.
felt like a set.
Hmm. I agree. And it has a kind of like visionary quality owing
Hmm.
to, Furiosa's, trauma to it that I can kind of forgive it. But I don't know, I mean, it doesn't feel, what it doesn't feel is it doesn't feel like uh, a what the fuck moment, right? It doesn't feel like the
Mm.
Mentis is a seriously demented guy. It feels like almost perfunctory, which it really shouldn't if somebody's being crucified over a fire and possibly being raped. Like, it should not feel perfunctory. Um,
It should feel shocking. Yeah.
Right, like in Mad Max 2, those guys who are crucified or on the cars who are held, that feels a lot more
Mm.
traumatic. You know, even
This should
even Mad
be,
Max as a blood boy, in
yeah.
Fury Road feels a lot more like, no, that's fucked up, dude. And this just feels like I'm looking at a painting or something.
No, I agree. But and I think this is the point. This is the point where you learn that because up until this point, like Dementus, when he's first introduced to Furiosa, he's the nice one. Like he has this white robe on, or I think it's a parachute that he's using as this sort of robe, and everyone else is sort of badgering her and trying to punish her into sort of giving up the location of the green place. And he comes in sort of almost looking like a white Jesus savior figure, and he's like, no, 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 go away. We will give you the best drinking water. You're going to have a bath. Give her something to eat. Protect her from the men. And then tomorrow I'm going to take you home. And it still has that sort of threat as like a cult leader would have, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to treat you nice now, but tomorrow's going to be different, kind of thing.
Well, or
But
tomorrow I'll just take you home. What I'm not telling you is, of course, I'm going to destroy your home as
yes,
soon as I get
exactly.
there,
Yeah.
right?
But
But
you're
there's
right.
candy along the way.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the only time where I really feel like Dementus is something interesting. And
Mhm.
so to contrast that, this scene of her being crucified with the fire should feel shocking. Like it should really feel like, oh, this guy is, he is demented. Like this guy is, it's like Harvey Two-Face. Like he can be that controlled, polite, educated person on the one hand, and on the other, like he's gonna skin you alive,
Mhm.
one patch at a time whilst you're hanging
Mhm.
off a tree. Like, you should feel like that's the sort of the possibility. And it never feels like that. And you're right. He never recaptures the kind of menace that he has in that first introductory scene.
Yeah, and I think for this being the origin of Furiosa's revenge, which is
Hmm.
really the basis of the entire film, uh, feeling that it's somehow less or painting like or perfunctory is not a good thing.
No.
Um, and then immediately after this, as Furiosa accepts her new life with Dementus, she gets a little tattoo. She's in a
Hmm.
cage. She gets from this guy in a
The
cage,
history man.
the
Yeah.
history man, the tattoo, and she puts this little. How does she make a star chart back
I
to the
don't
green
know.
place? I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's like Waterworld, right? With I mean, it's a cliche of like the map home tattooed on somebody. It's kind of a good idea, but I don't know how she makes it. I don't know even how you'd follow that star chart, but I certainly don't know how she remembers it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's never mentioned. Like, there's not even a mention of like follow the stars, or like there's no
Right.
scene of her with her mother saying like, look up and you see that star constellation that's always there in the sky. Like, there's nothing that links it to a star chart. I don't know. It's funny you said I thought of Waterworld as well when she put it on. I was like, oh, okay, we've been here before. This is interesting. Um, it does
And
single
then
out
it's
the
never
arm as
followed up, right? Like
no,
they know that's a star
yeah,
chart, but then
yeah.
like nobody ever is like, oh, we're gonna follow that to the green place. They
Well,
just
one of
kind of give
the
up.
Yeah, well, one of the things that she puts it on the arm that she's inevitably going to lose as well. So
Yeah.
there was that point as well. Um, I mean, let's skip forward because there is this sort of like she chooses to live with Immortan Joe. During well, no, Immortan Joe says he wants her because she's shown to be a full life. She's got all her teeth and she's a full life, and so he sees her as adding to the
And she's
harem.
young and attractive, and
Yeah,
so as a part of this negotiations after stealing Gastown,
yeah.
you know, and Morden Joe demands Furiosa, and Dementus just kind of says yes. I mean, he seems a little reluctant, but
Well, yeah, this is where again one of those scenes where he should have done either more or something different. But I like that also he also takes his doctor, who he calls the organic mechanic. I think it's a great name.
uh-huh. Yeah.
That feels like a Mad Maxy kind of like thing. Um, but this is the first time she's spoken since she's been taken, and Morton Joe says to her like, do you want to stay with him or your father, or do you want to come here? And she turns on Dementus and basically says, "You killed my mother, suck it," basically. And he's kind of hurt that she's. I think he's hurt. Like
Hmm.
she's never spoken to him, she's never opened up, and he's sort of tried to sort of treat her as this surrogate child, surrogate daughter or whatever. He's given her this red hair to match his beard and all this other things like that. So, but it never feels like you've never really seen that. Do you know what I mean? Like you've kind of seen
Hmm.
at one point he saved her during the Citadel attack, but it never feels like he's formed a bond with her. And again, it needed that scene where all the sort of pretense fell away for him to be vulnerable with her, because that's where that anger will then come from of like, I was vulnerable with you and you still didn't, form a
Right.
connection. So I don't know. It feels like there's something missing in that relationship.
I agree with you completely. I also am puzzled by him killing her mother in that way and making sure that she watches.
Mm,
Because it's like if your goal is to like you presumably he wants her to know that this is a tough world and I've tried to be nice to you, but I'm also going to be savage. But
yeah,
clearly at that point, he knows she's not going to give up the green place after she's watched, her mother be killed. If she's already been resistant and silent and murdered people, Um, so I was confused. Again, it's like even at this point in the film, I don't know what Dementis's motivation is. He seems to have given up on the green place. He's obviously
yeah,
given up on her. She's a surrogate daughter, but kind of not really. Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's not consistent.
yeah.
So,
So
so she's taken to the harem.
yeah, and as we sort of know, she doesn't stay there. So Richter shows an interest in her. She uses that as a because he's got something in her hair. She uses that as a chance to escape because she cuts all her hair off and disappears, and then presents herself as a boy, and she becomes one of the dogs, the wheel dogs, whatever. So she's doing the thing that we've seen in Fury Road to keep the engines going. Does she basically helps them save a truck that they're trying to take somewhere off, it's on a pulley rig or sort of thing. She jumps in and helps, and then becomes one of the mechanics, basically, hiding the fact she's a girl, and so everyone sort of accepts her as a boy. She becomes the mechanic and helps build the very first war rig, which, as you are right to say, they build because they lose a standard tanker to um, Dementus, which is what happened, and it's also the loss of that tanker that resulted in them losing Gastown. So they're now building their first war rig, and so she's on that. This then leads to my favourite scene, to be honest, because then she forms this plan of cool. While she's at it, she'll be able to escape by staying under the war rig, and at some point she can get out and run away and sort of return to the
And
green
take
place.
a vehicle back to the
Yeah,
green place. Okay, so I want to interject here because this should feel like multiple chapters of a very storied life,
yeah,
right?
and it
Um,
is chapter, just to highlight. There are chapter, but headings that pop up, that sort of thing. So yes,
with some of like the worst chapter titles,
yeah,
like Tarantino has it all up on this. That last one is what, like Absolute Vengeance or
Beyond
something?
Vengeance.
Beyond Vengeance. God. I mean, I there's one that's like Lessons from the Wasteland. I like
Because
that one, but I'm not sure why it was that chapter.
we never get to
But
see any of the lessons.
exactly, but so this should feel like these different chapters of a very storied, hard life that's made Furiosa, right?
Hmm.
And this whole business with her in the harem. I have read the prequel comics to Fury Road, and that sort of, depicted that she was part of that harem. And it was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And people were mad at it, for being sexist and all this stuff. Um, I feel like this chapter where she's in the harem is incredibly short.
Hmm.
In the comics, it feels like it was much longer. And I feel like, in Fury Road, she clearly has some connection to the harem because she's trying to rescue them. This is really all we see of the harem
Yes.
is her brief stint, admittedly as a very young girl, as a child, in that harem. And we do see that like Immortan Joe is preoccupied with a genetic, with an offspring who's not dead and
Mm.
deformed, right? Which we see in Fury Road, but we see more of it here. And we also see that after a woman has given birth to one of these, you know, uh, monstrosities, quote unquote, they are then turned into one of those
Milkers.
milking women that
Yeah.
we saw in Fury Road. So, okay, this is all interesting backstory. But then she escapes so easily and so preposterously, to my mind. I had a real problem with this escape. I thought this should have been a longer chapter of her life, with the harem. That obviously there should be some emotional connection to them that makes her risk everything to take them with her
Hmm.
at the beginning of Fury Road. And instead, again, it just kind of feels perfunctory. It's.
Right. I'm going to interject because I agree with you completely. Right. But this is why I think everything you're saying right now, in this scene, I completely agree with you about this, and I think this scene it encapsulates everything I dislike about prequels because it's a film, right? And this goes what? This is 2.5 hours long, 2 hours 28 minutes. Um, but you've still got all this stuff that you've got to cover. Oh, we know she was part of the harem. We know she did this. We know she did that. Okay, we've got to get this in, but we can't just do and then this and this because that becomes a montage. Just you might as well just do the comics. And I think you are right. Everything you're saying is completely right because she does. She runs off. We've already mentioned that she's a new addition to the harem, so she's identified. She's wearing the chastity belts and the white flowing clothing and stuff. And she runs off, and then basically sort of Richter's chase after, but then he can't be found. That he's taken her from the harem, so he sort of hides the fact that it's happened. But you never find out what Immortan Joe thinks about this. There's never any sort of blow up for it. It just sort of passes, as you say, it's perfunctory. This felt so much like Han Solo getting his gun or his name in Solo that it was eye rolling to me.
No, I think you're entirely right. And I think that if you're going to do a prequel where you're like, okay, she's got to have some connection with a harem, right? The number one thing you do is you say, okay, so we've got to get her there, right? And we've got to get her out of there. It's not 100% clear how that would happen, but she's also got to have an emotional connection to the harem, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of, yeah, and so you want to tell a story of her in the harem that has that emotional connection, right? Where, a woman is just upset over knowing she's being raped. She's going to give birth to, a deformed child who's going to die, by a madman, and then she's going to be sent to be milked, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like this, yes, we have a perfumed cage, right? A gilded cage, but, there should be some conversation about that. Instead, we don't hear any of them talk almost. They kind of welcome her there. So it's like this is this major thing with prequels of like they check the boxes, but they don't do the work of remembering there's an emotional connection that has to be established, right? So it's like the substance is drained, right? Like, oh, Han Solo's acquired the Millennium Falcon, but what's his emotional attachment to it? How does he care about the Falcon that much? Well, that's not important. All that matters is we check that box, right? So the fact that there's no blowback to losing the new edition that that Immortan Joe has negotiated personally.
Yep.
Never see any of that. She magically slides underneath this platform, which I'm not sure how she got under, but okay. But then how does she get down from there?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's not important. How does she get integrated? I like that she disguised herself as a boy. How does she get integrated with them? A stranger just shows up and, she's just working with them now.
All of a sudden she just starts working. Yeah, I agree. I want to sort of, this is where, and I'm going to throw this in now because this is chaptered. And I'm not sure, this is where I think something like this would have been better as a prestige TV show.
Yep.
Where you'd be like, right, here's the episodes that look at her as a young child. You could have so much more time in the Green Place, set up all that stuff, have a parallel storyline with like how the Green Place came about compared to the Citadel. Then you have her stolen, and you could end the episodes with that chase that ends up with her in front of Dementus, and then her time with Dementus, the torturing of her mother, so on and so forth. Like each episode would have that kind of thing. You have it over 6 episodes, hour-long episodes. Like you could cover so much of this stuff, and you could provide a really interesting like series of story that expands the lore, creates interesting characters, and then leads up to Fury Road. That becomes almost like Fury Road almost becomes like the season finale in a big double bill kind of thing.
No, I agree with you completely, and but even as a movie, I think these are bad choices.
Yes, I agree.
And I was really upset by that transition to how easily she escapes. Number one, there's no follow up on it. How does she get down from there? Suddenly she's working as a mechanic. There's a whole lot missing there, and there's a whole lot included in this movie that I don't need. Yes. So that's a pretty important part if you're going to do a prequel to Fury Road that I was annoyed by.
Too much Dementors, not enough Furiosa. I think that's the clip point. I do like that. This is where I do like this idea of the transition of time, where her wig falls off and lands on this tiny branch, and then you see that growing and expands, and the wig sort of gets woven into the branch, which obviously mirrors this idea of the green, which is coming through, but it will also be this idea of sort of her being woven in with a tree and the seeds and also that I like that, but also just as a showing of the passing of time of how this could be years that she's now been hidden away. Well, it's been years and she's been hidden away and she's been working as a um not a war boy, but one I think they call them one of the engine dogs or something like that. I think they call them. So I like that.
I love that transition too. I thought
Yeah.
that was really beautiful. I agree with you completely.
And that does take us to the next bit, and she then, but like you said, then this whole thing of how she then again kind of perfunctory. There's a truck that's been winched up. It goes a bit wrong. She jumps in, helps, and all of a sudden she's sort of made, she's promoted as it were, and then is able to work her way into becoming an engineer, a mechanic. This is where what we are shown at one point is the sleeping arrangements, and they're all just sort of strewn on these beds across the floor. Right now, this is one of the this is something again. I'm trying to be sort of careful. No, let's not be careful. Anya Taylor-Joy, very beautiful woman, right? That aside, because she's covered in mud and she's hiding herself and she's keeping her hair hidden, all sort of stuff. That's great. I cannot imagine that they have gendered bathrooms in the Citadel.
Well, do you remember there's a scene where she's peeing and I thought that was a nice scene because at least it touched on these problems, right? And is it Jack who comes up and sees that she's sort of peeing in secret?
No, no, it's not. I think it's somebody else because Jack doesn't recognize that she's a boy until she's a girl. Sorry, until on the war rig when it's all being attacked later on.
No, but so you're right. So at least they kind of address this.
Yeah.
But it's also like, look, let's be clear. Whether it's soldiers on duty or it's like missionaries, on a doubled up Mormon mission trip, like guys have sex with each other when they are secluded, okay?
Yeah.
And they are far from the harem. There's a lot of fooling around, tomfoolery, as we used to call it in the Navy. That's probably going to go along. It's hard to imagine exactly how this would feel. And again, in a miniseries, you'd have time to show it.
Yeah, exactly. Like the struggles that she has to get through, and even maybe you want to have it like she ends up fighting off the interests of a war boy, or one of the mechanics or whatever. That they can have all those things in it. It just felt kind of easy. Everything felt kind of easy. Where I'm like, she's angry all the time and she's done this and she's done that, but I'm like, yeah, felt kind of easy that she's done all that. None of this has ever come up before. Like she's never injured herself or she's never had to get changed or be in a situation where it's going to become obvious that someone's gone, huh, you know, that's that's not the shape of a war boy. That's the shape of a war woman. Like I don't know, it feels a bit odd.
Well, and I think this is for me as a viewer, a point where I'm seriously out of the movie. Because I sort of started it and I like the chase, but I felt a little thrown out in the very early stuff. I sort of put off by the crucifixion. I don't really get what Demences is doing. And then we have her in the harem. I'm like, okay, you've checked that box. I'm not happy with the escape. And now she's sort of, just there. And I'm thinking, all of this feels very easy. I don't know what it feels like to really live there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is one thing the Mad Max movies have done really well.
Yeah.
They've, really shown what it feels like to live in these crazy societies and been able to do that in shorthand in like 5 minutes. And there's a montage of building that war rig, like it's a big fucking deal. They're building the war rig. And that feels very much like Han getting the Millennium Falcon,
It does, but I do like the montage of it coming together. Like it looks cool. Like it's kind of visually it looks really cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's fine. I like it, but I am already kind of like thrown out by the film and feeling like it's kind of checking these boxes.
Yes.
And then she goes off with Jack and they have this big, survival fight where they're the only ones left at the end.
how do you feel about it? Goes for 15 minutes. This thing does. How do you feel about this? This is almost like the Fury Road moment in the film.
Yeah, I feel like it's fine. There's a lot of like, it struggles with what are they going to do that's new because
Hmm.
every Mad Max movie has to have new combat, new fucked up
Yeah, yeah,
stuff, right? So here, what's new is every fight scene in this one involves cranes, right?
yeah.
So like the crane as the war device is important here. Not important in Fury Road. Okay, whatever. It's kind of interesting, But and then they have this thing on the back of the war rig that spins with these
Hmm.
maces. That's cool. I like is it a little person who's inside who's supposed to operate it and
Can I
gets
just call
killed?
this out? I don't know if this is true. And I wanted to check it. I didn't get a chance. But in fact, I'm gonna whilst this is great podcasting, but um the boy that plays he's called the War Pup is what he's
Mhm.
credited at. Um maybe I'll find him. Now he was given that role, I believe, and I'm going to sort of do it whilst I'm doing it because it's already cool. I believe he was a kid that was bullied because of his looks, and George Miller, um, what here you go. I'm going to see if I can find it. Oh, I got to find it. Yeah, he was a kid that was bullied and basically was given the role as a sort of like, oh, you basically your look would be good, which I'm not entirely sure is a good thing. I don't know. Um, yeah. So I believe it was a kid that was given an opportunity, which I think is kind of cool, if that's true.
That's cool. Yeah.
Um, oh, it was. His name is Quaden Bales. The boy behind the war pup in Mad Max was a boy that was bullied at school for the way he looked. So that's cool.
Well, kudos to George Miller and
Yeah.
everyone involved in giving him that chance. And I like that character. I
Mm.
like the sadness of I like seeing him on the lettuce and stuff. It's all very weird in Mad Max.
That
Um,
felt ace when he's just sat there and he's like spraying the chrome into his hands just so he can see what it looks like.
yeah, and he's like getting high, but it's not
Yeah.
to fight.
Yeah.
It's just because it's cool to get high, right? That stuff's good. They really build up the spinner device on the back, which of course later on Jack can operate from the console, inside the truck cab. So, I'm not sure, for convenience sake, I get why they did that, but
Mm.
minor gripe. But I will say that's a cool little device.
Mm.
Those those spiked balls that are hanging from that device are clearly going to hit those tires.
Yeah.
There were a
Yeah.
few things like that where I feel like the design could have been a little better.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's kind of fun. Um, it is it's a fun like the maces that fly around, all this other stuff, a cool idea. And they have a few of those. Like they show that there's introduction of things like they've got the balance pole that goes from
Mm.
the the truck front, the cab to the back and stuff, and they'll sort of swing between them, which I think is kind of cool. So they introduce all those things, but they also you say about the crazy thing is well they have a lot of air attacks, don't they? In this one, they've
Yeah.
got people on like big propellers, and at one point the Octobus comes in and he's got like two and his bikes on them and all this other stuff. Like they got some cool designs and some fun ideas, and it lasts. I mean, as well, it goes. One of the things I liked about this, and I thought was this is what I think is the height of the movie. I think this whole scene is the best bit because it does have like it's a three-leveled fight because you've got the stuff coming in the air that's being shot out, and then you've got the cars coming at the side and sort of stuff, and then you've actually so the war boys on the top and that. But then underneath, because you've got Furiosa, she's hidden under this, and she ends up getting involved without the others knowing, and she's sort of holding on to things and clinging on. And the mechanic who's riding along with Jack originally gets injured, and she takes it on herself then to sort of crawl under the truck, under the war rig, to go and replace the part in the engine, the bit of pipe that's missing and stuff. And so again, I like the fact there's a lot going on. It's not just Jack riding along and people fighting. It's there's all this other stuff going on. And you get some crazy scenes, silly scenes. It taps back into the silliness of um, Fury Road. For example, you talk about the war pup in that like sat with his cabbages, which I did. I think that was fantastic. Um, but you also get the moment later on when sort of one of the attacking bikers sticks some dynamite
Hmm.
onto the truck, and like Furiosa grabs it, but then shortly after, one of the war boys grabs it and hurls himself onto one of the attacking cars. But in doing so, blows the car up so high it lands on top of the war rig.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool. Right.
yeah,
Where it lands on the front of the war rig. Yeah.
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 In doing so, knocks off one of those heads that's sort of like onto the engines and stuff. And so that starts sort of like, blowing out steam. But also leads to one of my other favorite moments is in order to cool it down, they have
Mm.
piss boys who's got basically jars of pee on his belt, and he's there to pour piss into this thing to keep the engine cool. Stuff like that. I'm like, this all feels like Mad Max craziness. Like
Oh, I agree. And
the stuff
as he
it's
pours the piss in, he says, "Drink my piss." And
yeah.
that is the kind of like over the top. Like I don't know how to feel about it, but it's weird and cool and fun. That does feel very Mad Max.
Yeah, so all that I'm like, this is feeling not just this is where I'm going. People going, oh, this is Fury. No, this is not just Fury Road. This feels similar to Road Warrior
Hmm.
that we've seen. This
Yep.
feels similar to some of the weirdness you had in Bartertown, in Thunderdome. This feels George Miller. This is where I'm going. Oh, George Miller's just letting loose on this bit, and that's where this all the fun is. And it works. I think it works really, really well.
Okay, so I agree with you about all of that, except that all of those sequences from past films were narratively very important, right? Those were traditionally like that's the climax of Mad Max 2, right?
Yeah.
Um, what is the point of this attack here? It's just a random attack on the road that is not really important to the plot,
Well,
except it kills Jack's entire crew, and so Jack has to,
it's
stop
too
and go back for Furiosa.
it is important because it is actually important for a wider piece, and it actually comes back to Dementus because it's the Octoboss that's attacking the war rig and his crew, and you find that they have broken away from Dementus, and so they are actually acting as a rogue unit because they know that these trucks pass between each of the things. So it's showing that the Octobos has now sort of turned on Dementor, so he's losing control. But they have this information, so it has a little bit of a meaning. But like you say, but it's not critical to the plot. It adds to this thing of, oh, we now know that things kind of falling apart for Dementus, but it also clears the path to allow Furiosa to become part of Praetorian Jack's war crew.
Which is nice, except for two
Hmm.
two problems that I have. One is that Jack is a Mad Max clone. He looks almost exactly like Mel Gibson. Okay, I mean
Yeah,
if you want to recast Mel Gibson in a
this
future, you
this guy
just get
should have
him to
done
do it.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Except he doesn't quite have the charisma. He seems kind of like, and then I start wondering why did Furiosa not respond more favorably to Max? And she's already been through a template. I feel weird about that. And then you're right, it does establish she is more important to Jack, and they have a plan eventually to escape together and go to the green place. Except the movie has just not shown me how she got the job in the first place. So
Yeah.
how she ascends the ranks, they showed me ad nauseum. If that's the point of the fight. So I'm kind of like, okay, another checkbox check. Like she's more important to this group that I don't really understand why she got with it first.
Well, I agree. So there's two things. I think I really like, again, I think this scene, one of the things I really like in this whole chase is the fact that Jack just stays in the rig. And there's several
Mm-hmm.
moments when they zoom in on the cabin and he's there and doing his thing. And I did think exactly as you. I thought like this feels insanely Mad Max. Like this is Max. Like,
Yeah.
this is the setup. Um, and so I feel that actually, as you say, I almost took it the other way that she because obviously, we'll get to it, and Jack dies. Um, I almost feel that there is something there later on. So watching this and then seeing Fury Road, and when you see Max sort of, when he has his sort of his leather jacket on, and he's sort of, in his leathers and stuff later on in the film, I feel a little bit like this kind of does it not explains, but like I can see them being related in that, like she feels reluctant because she's like, yeah, I'm not, because she falls in love with Jack. I think they have a relationship, a connection. I don't know, but
There's
it's
some
almost
kind
like,
of connection. She cares about him,
yeah,
right? And vice versa.
but it's
He
almost like
knows
she
who she is and has given her a shot, right?
exactly. Um, so I almost feel like she's now been hardened to that thing. So seeing
Hmm.
Max actually might sort of bring some up, and so she's even harder towards him because she's like, oh, I know what you road warriors are like. Like I can't be part of that sort of thing. So I think he's an interesting character, not interesting enough to really do anything more than go, that's quite interesting. Like, he's there again, perfunctory, sort of serves a role. But one of the things is, again, this is where the film sort of frustrates me. Lessons from the wasteland. She's
Hmm.
now got to a point where she has established her place. He's gone, you're good at what you do. You've saved the war rig, because he pushes her off, doesn't he? Then he comes back, and you have that moment where he walks over the hill in his leathers and stuff, and that is insanely like Mel Gibson in sort of Road Warrior or
Hmm.
one of those. I was like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. And then he says, join the crew, sort of thing. But the next time you see them is again, unknown period of time has passed because we don't get a montage, and now she's just like part of the crew. It's just, oh, we
Hmm.
now know that it's Furiosa and Jack. No one in the Citadel has gone, who's this woman that is now working with Jack? And her name seems familiar from
Yeah.
some time ago, maybe.
I think
Like,
she might be that girl who escaped. I mean,
yes,
there is one person who sort of says, "You look familiar," and then they
yeah,
brush it off, right, and
yeah,
move on. But I'm with you. Yeah, I
yeah.
also found that. And how much time has passed?
Don't know.
But so at this point, I'm pretty thrown out of the movie. You've had
Hmm.
this like dramatic fight, and I'm like, I love watching this, but don't really remember why they're attacking again. Like, what are the stakes here? It's well done, but I'm kind of like, okay. And then I'm like, well, all right, check the box. Now she's important to the war rig. Like
Yeah.
she's the second. Okay, now she's imperator, I guess. What does that status mean? She seems to have a lot of status at the beginning of
Hmm.
Fury Road. She clearly does not have that status here, right? I mean, she's just
Well,
important to
she's
Jack.
she is celebrated at the start of Fury Road as
Hmm.
being like, even the war boys all hold up the bomb sticks that they've got, or the bullet sticks that they've got, and cross their arms, whatever. Like she's held as sort of like, as not just a senior officer, but like a seasoned warrior. Like they
Hmm.
recognized her contribution. So yeah, this is that thing about this. What I'm saying about the passing of time. Like I don't know how long she's been doing this. Is it that like she's been doing this for so long now that like everyone is now seeing her in that sort of similar role as the Charlize Theron level Furiosa? I don't
But
know.
and so then the next time you really see them, they're going to Bullet Town. There's
Yeah.
no real crew, right? They've clearly evacuated, the dead bodies and stuff, but there's no crew.
Mm.
Like it's not like he's replaced that entire crew. Uh, Immortan Joe clearly has tons of guys. I mean, and they go to Bullet Town, and that happens to be the day where you find out later where Dementor
Well,
has
this goes back to this because
demented.
yeah, there's a bit here to explain why they've gone to Bullet Town, because this is where I think it's the other way around. Do they find it at this point? He's said, "I will be. We want a meeting in 3 days' time at noon at the Citadel." Like, we have
Dementus has said,
Dementus has
right?
said this. Sorry, Dementus has said 3 days' time at noon at the Citadel. We want a war council because of this, this, and this. Like, he's not happy with how things are going in Gastown and stuff. He's not hanging on, and so they're sort of like, okay, well, yes, this will happen, but you know, we need to make sure we're ready. So they get sort of sent to Bullet Town to basically load up. on
Yeah.
on Kit. Like you said, but when they get there, it's empty. There's a dog eating a foot, and we find out that Dementus and his crew have taken Bullet Town. But and then we do see some people again, like people that are scavenging around. But this is where, so this is another question I have, and it's the only time. This is that thing of when you start to scratch the surface, you start to ask questions. Now, this is the first time I have to ask this question. I haven't thought about it for the Citadel because you've kind of seen some of the way that that's set up. But all of a sudden, I'm starting to ask questions because, well, for bullets, you need a production line. And if you have a production line to forge metal and gunpowder and all sorts of stuff, you need people. Okay.
Yep.
Same for gasoline. Like oil does not just become gasoline, right? You have to process it and refine it, and you do things to it for it to come from crude oil to become different sort of, oil-based substances. That takes people and skill and knowledge and machinery and all this other stuff. And people have got to maintain the machinery. That's why, oil rig workers and oil refinery processors get a lot of money. So where are all these people? We know that there are. So then I go back to the Citadel. I'm going, okay, well, they farm food. They have water. They are producing cabbages. But you've still got to tend the soil. You've got to turn the soil. You've got to plant the seeds. You've got to grow them, tend to them. You've got to then harvest them. And if you're harvesting enough that it's shown that you are now filling a war rig full of cabbages and things, that takes a lot of people to do that kind of thing. So who's doing that work?
At the Citadel?
At the Citadel, at Gastown, at Bullet Farm, who is the workers that are doing the work of? You've seen the zombie-like scabrous people running around that are desperate for water. You've seen people rebelling in Gastown. You kind of see a group of people at the bottom of the quarry in the Bullet Farm, but at no point this is that other thing where I'm going. If you're going to expand the law, tell me how things work. So how does this operation work?
See, I could kind of give the Citadel a pass on this because you see those caverns and you see like some kind of like hydroponic kind of stuff, and so it's hard to imagine that's really industrial level production. And you're right, we don't really see a ton of it. But I think it actually works relatively well for the Citadel and for Gastown. More for Gastown because you see the mobs of people storming, who are in revolt and whatever. So clearly there's a big worker cast there, right? It's a little unclear exactly how Citadel works. And it's interesting you said this is the moment where you start questioning that. I had the same response, and for me it's less about the Citadel and Gastown and more about Bullet Farm.
Bullet Farm. Well, Bullet Farm's what triggered it for me. Yeah.
Just looks like a fucking mine.
Yeah.
There's no awesome design work or anything. It's just a mine carved out, and nobody's there. And I get that, this is where, for me, I had the same thought of like, where is everybody? If Dementus has captured them all, and they were like all in some pen down below or something, you see a few people, but you don't really see, it seems remarkably depopulated. And it's producing tons of bullets. Like the bullets are just flowing like crazy, right? So I had the same response of, this is a massive operation, and I don't believe in it the way I believe in Gastown or the Citadel. It seems like it's kind of been phoned in. And this will actually play out for the rest of the movie, where for the rest of the movie, it's like, it seems very phoned in. All the copious extras that were there in the Citadel with the suicide bomber scene and all of that, they were all disappear at Bullet Farm and for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
For the rest of the movie, it becomes oddly stagey. So I had the same response. Bullet Farm just left me very cold. Even the fight there seemed, pretty perfunctory. Everything goes boom, boom.
Yeah, and again, it's almost like you almost have like the Star Trek problem here. Why is the captain Dementus? Why is he gone to take Bullet Farm? Like, surely he should have sent his armies. Like, he should still be in Gastown. Like, it feels again like, oh, he needs to be there for this scene because we want to have this scene of him taking on, Furiosa. And being in close quarters. But again, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. But But yeah, I agree. Like the moment they ride into Bullet Town, it felt to me like because it rings round, it circles around like a mine as it does into a
Mhm.
funnel. And so I was going, okay, you've got this idea of hell or whatever. But I was like, no, this is just a cool action scene. They've just gone, they want to do this, this, and this. And it works. It's fine. I like it. The flamethrowers, and you've got Jack sort of driving the war rig, and um, um, Furiosa is now in it, initially trapped outside and other stuff. But they say the thing is they say after, oh, he's taken Bullet Town. And I'm sort of going, yeah, but he hasn't, has he? He's stopped Bullet Town because it's
Yes.
it's no longer able to manufacture anything. So he hasn't
Well, and
taken
then
it;
it gets
he's ruined
completely
it.
destroyed
Yeah,
in the fight, right? The fight destroys literally this equipment, which in a post-apocalyptic world is
would
hard to
be
get. And,
yeah.
so
So
Bullet Town's gone.
yes, so I get kind of frustrated with that as well. That like exactly, I felt the same. I'm like, well, Bullet Farm's gone. Bullet Farm's gone at this point.
Right. So
Um,
how is it apparently up and running in Fury Road? I mean, yeah, it seems like at this point it just seems like something else that happens.
mhm.
And keep in mind, I'm
Yeah,
kind of thrown out of the last fight because I'm like, it seems oddly stakeless. And now it seems like there's another big action sequence. Again, the action sequences are well done. It's fine. It's just that what is the point? Well, the point is that Dementus has conquered Bullet Farm in between scenes. I don't really know how much time is passing. I don't know why there isn't more people on the rig.
mm.
Um, it's a decent action sequence, I guess.
I like
I'm
the
really
action.
thrown out.
I like the action. I really like. I think the action's good. I think it's fun. I think it works. I think this is the first time we really see sort of like Furiosa as Furiosa. Like she gets out the sniper rifle. She's done some other bits. Like it's establishing her as a bit of a badass. Now she's sort of in. She's on par with Jack. And it's all fine. But as you say, the thing is, again, you mentioned then between scenes, like um, one of the things that happens in fact we've seen it in this as well, actually, as well as Fury Road. At the Citadel, they've got a whole load of telescopes and spy glasses and all this other stuff on the top of the Citadel, because the idea is that from where they are, they can see lots of the wasteland, so they can see Gastown and the Bullet Farm using those telescopes and spy glasses, and no one's gone. A lot of activity over at the Bullet Farm. I'm not shooting that going on over there. Like it's gone completely unnoticed that a party has left the gas town. Not just a party, but run by
A
Dementors.
convoy.
A
Yeah.
convoy has left Gastown to go to the Bullet Farm, and this has all happened, and no one has noticed. Yet we are routinely shown throughout both these films that they use their spy glasses to keep an eye on things that are going on. So it feels again like between scenes is very convenient to this. It sort of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another problem, which is that all of this is triggered by this revolt in Gastown,
Mm-hmm.
where the crew is barely able to escape, and they escape without their gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
They've had their goods stolen from the Citadel, but they haven't gotten the gasoline. Several of them have died doing this, right?
Mm. Mm.
So presumably, and Dementa seems to say, you're right, meet in 3 days, right? Like, I'm barely holding on here, meet in 3 days. Did he just then? That's clearly a response to conditions in Gastown.
Yes.
He could not have predicted that because he's desperately trying to get them out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not part of some master plan. This is like he threw that idea of meeting in 3 days and then thought on the fly, well, you know what I better do is I'd better take over Bullet Farm and then use it to take over the Citadel to cement my reign. So even if we do pause to figure out like why all of this has happened, you're right about the logistical problems with the spy glasses, why Bullet Farm seems depopulated, seems strange. But even if we ignore all of that, this is all part of Dementus winging it.
Yes. It felt like it. Yeah. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's made up as it goes along. Like he wants to cement his power, but it never feels like it's holding together. Um, But then this
So
then look on.
yeah, so Dementus pursues Jack and Furiosa through the wasteland. They're just like, screw it, we're gonna go to the green place now.
Mhm.
There's a chase, their car overturns. I think that's well done. I like that, the chase was well done, and then they're captured. And this is where Dementus, tortures Jack and kills Jack, and Furiosa has lost an arm, and Furiosa is tied to the back of a vehicle as, and this is a real low point for me, as a circle of motorcycles are driving around the car in the middle, where Dementus just goes to the front of the car and stands there. And then you see a montage as hours and hours pass. Those cars are still burning gasoline. I mean, those motorcycles are still burning gasoline, driving around in a circle all these hours later. Jack is presumably expired, and Dementus has presumably spent 2 hours, 5 hours, something like that, hanging out on the front of the car. Goes back to the car to check on her, and she has torn her arm loose,
Yep.
which is how she's lost her arm. Which is like, I get it, it's badass. Of course, in reality, people bleed out, but okay, let's ignore that. Okay, so first of all, why do you have these motorcycles driving around burning gas for 5 hours? And how has Furiosa ripped her own arm off and then escaped through the convoy of motorcycles without anyone seeing her? Like, there's got to be a guy on a motorcycle.
motorbike. On a motorbike.
On a motorcycle, right? She's gone
Yeah.
through them and she's punctured the tires. There's got to be some guy on those motorcycles going like, Dementus, it's been like 5 hours. We're running out of gasoline right now. Also, that girl who you chained to the back, we all just watched her rip her arm off, puncture tires, get on a motorcycle, and go through us. Maybe one of us should tell you?
Yeah. Well, this is where, again, this is one of the things that this film does, is like it's going to do things off screen, and it ends up leaving you with questions. Well, actually, there could be a way of doing this. I perfectly feel that there's a way of doing this, with the setup, but you need to see her doing it to see how good and how badass Furiosa is. The fact that it just sits, so you sit and watch Hemsworth eating a sausage and then just basically sort of drifting off, and then he sort of decides to have his microphone back and stuff, is garbage. It's utter garbage. Like, this infuriated me. This did. It really did, because I was like, this feels lazy. Like, oh, we've got to show this, but we want it to be a surprise that he comes across, the arm has been pulled off. And I'm like, right, because again, tick the box, she lost her arm. And you go, cool, I'm fine with that, because actually the bit where they're racing and the big wheel, the monster truck comes up against the side of a car, and it's actually the wheel that sort of like crushes her arm against the side of it and starts to tear it to pieces. Awesome. That's great. I'm happy with that, because that's a really cool way of her losing her arm and stuff. So I'm fine with all that. But you need to see her making that decision to tear her arm off. And how does she steal a motorbike to then hide herself in that small does she use that there's the sand that's all being, or the dust that's being kicked up, she uses it to hide. She needs to do something to do that, and I just think it's really weak sauce that they don't do anything with that. They just have her then, riding across the desert again to get back to the Citadel.
Yeah. So my sort of groan-worthy kind of like, yeah, that was a bad choice. How exactly did that happen again? I'm kind of thrown out. So she gets back to the Citadel.
Oh, before she gets back to the Citadel, cameo.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, but this is going to be important. So we see Mad Max.
We do see Max
with his car, just like at the very beginning of Fury Road, right? And he's over, right? So we all know what this is, right? And he's in a very similar spot to where he was, at the beginning of Fury Road. Okay. So clearly, we've now caught up to the beginning of Mad Max.
We have not.
Of Fury Road.
No,
right?
We have not. George Miller.
What?
Yeah.
We haven't?
No.
Max has been hanging out there in that same spot? Like, Max really loves bluffs, okay? What you don't understand about Max is we see the action sequences, but in fact, most of what Max does is hang out on bluffs.
He loves the view. He's like, I've come here to catch the sunset. I come here every night to catch the sunset. No, it's not this. It's not. It is Max. It's played by the stuntman that doubled for Tom Hardy in Fury Road. I thought that was kind of cool.
Mhm.
But no, George Miller was like, "Oh no, that's not the time. That's just Max being out in the wasteland." And you're like, "Oh, what?
Right.
What?
So he knows about the Citadel, right? I mean, he's in
How
sight of
far
the
away? Yeah,
Citadel.
exactly. How far away is it? Has he been watching Dementus and this massive horde of motorbikes? Like, I don't know. It really, again, it was like, oh look, there's the Interceptor. But I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
didn't need this. It's a nice
Yeah.
nod, but like, if anything, it's coming back to this thing we've been talking about. If you're gonna do a prequel, your continuity needs to be really tight.
Hmm.
And little things, and this is things like this, cameos like this. I get that they're fan service and it's kind of fun or whatever, but it just makes you look like you don't actually really give a crap, and that
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
bothers me.
especially if it doesn't match up, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So this I was like, okay, you check that box, but we've got to be right there at the beginning of Fury Road. Nope. Now you get the storyteller narrating how the world has always had wars,
Yeah.
and
40
now
days of
now you
war.
have the 40-day war between Dementus and Immortan Joe.
Yeah.
So even before this, you have this like ruse where they're pretending to, Furiosa tells Immortan Joe, don't listen to your advisors, your kids, you know, send out a small convoy to Gastown. You think Gastown's undefended, but this is all a ruse. And Immortan Joe listens to her.
Hmm.
Nobody at this point says, like, Furiosa, that name's familiar, right?
Yeah.
She's talking to Immortan Joe. Nobody says, like, you're just a mechanic, right? I mean, again, I'm very confused by how this hierarchy works or what kind of respect she has. Um,
Or influence.
but
Yeah. What influence has she now got over this? Mm.
yeah, I'm very confused by this. So there's this whole ruse of like, there's a convoy, and then that's not important ultimately. I don't know why they bother to include that, but then we have Dementa saying like, "Oh, they fell for it. They fall for everything," and he got this moment of high camp introducing this 40-day war, none of which is shown to us.
It was shown in montage again.
It's mostly shown in dust clouds,
Yeah.
with like stuntmen
Yeah.
driving motors. I mean, and then at the end of this, Furiosa goes out. Furiosa, at this point, I think the movie is just completely off the rails because I'm wondering, like, you're not showing us this. Why did you show us this kind of like uneventful, action scenes earlier, which are good action scenes, but I'm kind of thrown out of what they mattered for. I don't really understand how Furiosa is rising in the ranks. Mad Max is now hanging out on a cliff for 40 days watching people fight. I mean, I'm so confused and befuddled by this. During this time, got to check the prequel box. Furiosa constructs her own metallic arm.
Not just no. Not just constructs her own arm, the metallic arm, constructs her own robotic
Mm-hmm.
metallic arm that she can actually use to do things with. Like it reacts to things. It's not just a hook with things. Like it works as a hand.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, that to be honest, they taught her that in the Green Place, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this
Advanced
is
metallurgy and mechanics.
this is so stupid, and I'm like, I don't remember. I don't think it makes sense that she constructed it, but I also don't, we're coming up on Fury Road. Did she literally just build her own arm in the days leading up to Fury Road? Like in the time that Mad Max was hanging out on a cliff for God knows how long, a month and a half, something like that, she was constructing her arm. You know, I mean, this is really bad at this point. Um, and
Yeah.
then she goes out, apparently having just done nothing for the 40 days war, right? Just recovering and building her arm. Then she magically decides now's the time to get my revenge as the war is winding down. Goes out, sees Immortan's guys, which is like looks like a crew of 6 people
Yeah.
in a desert location. Like at this
Well,
point, all of
that's
those
the
extras are all gone.
but that's the thing there to note is that that's all he has left. Like his team has been decimated. So yeah.
Well, and then that team, which seems remarkably small to me, gets fooled by Furiosa and she takes, a car out. I did
Mm.
like this bit. So again, Dementus is down to like 6 people too, right? And I'm like, okay, you didn't show us the 40. Like this seems remarkably small scale. And I'm not bothered by the fact that it ends in this, small chase after these big action sequences as much as I am just, the smallness of the, not really seeing the 40 Days War and then magically everybody's down to 6 people. And this is when Furiosa, having built her own arm, decides to intervene, right at the end when they're down to 6 people. Does any of this seem good to you?
No, the ending's yeah. It's so sort of weirdly anticlimactic of everything. But I think that's part of this film. It's like, we're so used to sort of like every other Mad Max film has had some sort of like, big climactic finish. Less so with the first one, granted, but it still had like a big truck crash and other bits and pieces. The second one has the final run, and Thunderdome has the weird thing where they're on the railway track and all this other stuff. So you've had these big climactic sort of like crazy finishes, and this one tries to pull it all back down. It's a different kind of Mad Max film. This is going very, very different. You go, okay, cool. I'm not this thing about her constructing her own arm. Okay, she's been a mechanic for how many years? So all right, I'll buy the fact she can build the arm as a construction, but weld it together, put it all together and stuff. But this thing of building something where the fingers move and she can use it to sort of clamp on things. All right, a bit of a push. Um, but she was a mechanic she helped build the war rigs, so I'll give it that. But this piece where like she's finally ready, she's cut her hair off and she's finally ready, like she's now Furiosa ready. Um, she's wearing, well, yeah, she's actually got the long hair still, but like, so she then takes another crappy car and it goes out, and Scrotus, who's lost a wheel on his car, decides to steal the wheel from her car, and he's the one that's going to go after Dementus. But he ends up arguing with Rictus in sort of sibling silliness, and it's done for comedy between them. And whilst they're bickering, she steals the car that's now been sorted out. It's full of gas and got 4 wheels and drives off. And then they have a bit like, where's she going? And Rick just tries to run after her. And again, I'm like, I get that you've got comedy in others, but this kind of feels like you're trying to build up to her. You're not doing those other films now. You've tried to do a revenge thriller over, you need to drop all that for this finish. And you're right, this end though with her hunting down the last of the people, um, it all feels kind of anticlimactic. That she's got like they know that someone's coming. She starts to kill the people off. So Dementus again, weirdly, comes up with a plan off the cuff, fine, where someone else is given his robe and sent off on his motorbike chariot, and he goes off on another thing, and there's all this confusion. But it ends up being the two of them. It's only then that he calls her Little D, because she was referred to as Little D as a child, Little Dementus, and he recognizes her. And this is again where I'm like, if you'd have had that scene early on in the film where he had shed all this sort of Dementus craziness, and you'd seen him as a man that's like, this world has gone crazy. I think I've gone crazy. We need to be crazy to survive in it, kind of thing. If it was down to just them two again, and you could sort of mirror that moment, then and he's like, "Oh, look what you've become from what you were. You know, you've now shed all of your, pretense of the green place or the place of abundance or whatever. And you've now just become this thing." Look, if he could throw that back at her or something, it would be good. But it just becomes this like odd speech about he becomes sniveling and weaselly and all this other stuff. You know, and it's about this hope or hopelessness, and he's sort of like, yeah, none of this is landing. And then he's
No.
sort of then she's going to kill him. That's when he says, like, but the question is, do you have it in you to make it epic? And you're like, what was is if that has that been a theme throughout this film? Is that been something we're supposed to be like? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems very meta, right?
Mm, mm.
Except I feel like, well, the movie hasn't been very epic either.
No.
Despite its expanded canvas. But I'm with you, like they give Dementus this final scene and he says all this stuff, which, you were right to reference Negan earlier. All of this feels very Walking Dead, right?
Yes.
It's like this is what the wasteland has done to us. This is, how we survive in the post-apocalypse. It turns us mean, right? Um, and well, we've seen that a million times before, right?
Hmm.
Why is he the spokesperson for that? It all feels like, a monologue that, you could see why Hemsworth or somebody else would want to speak these lines, but it's not consistent with this character. I keep hearing these lines and I'm like, well, that's interesting, but that hasn't been on display throughout any of this movie.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
I saw people online talking about how deep this monologue is and
No.
how, it's the essence of Mad Max. And I'm just like, you guys don't understand cinema or plot or
Yeah.
how any of this works, you know?
But it could be everything he's saying again could be if you had seen that
Yep.
the wasteland had turned him into something. But you haven't. He's been the same kind. He has had no story arc whatsoever. So for him to say, "Oh, the wasteland turns you into this thing," you go, "Really? You seem like a dick when this started. You're still a bit of a dick. Like nothing has changed. How has it changed you? How have you become more brutal? Oh, you haven't. You just seem, buffoonish then, and you seem buffoonish now. Like yeah, it
You're
should
right.
be she should be it should parallel her. He should be saying to he's
Mm-hmm.
kind of saying it to her, but he needs to have the same thing where he's like, we were both human at one point. Now look at us. Like this is what
Right.
it's brought us to. You are no
Yeah.
better than me, kind of thing, which is again cliched, but
Yeah, it is a cliche, but you could do it well. I don't even
yeah.
see how she's become especially vicious. She's built her own arm. She's
Hmm.
lost her arm. She's had to do some tough things. But has she really become some kind of cold, vicious person? Well, she's been put through trials, but I mean, she hasn't really become mean. Um, and certainly him becoming mean, like take the revolt in Gastown. You don't see him say, like, look, I've got to do tough things. They only respect a strong man, right?
Hmm.
I'm making it up as I go along, but they only respect a strong man. You kill at 1 in 10, right? Literally Roman decimation. We're going to kill 1 in 10 of these peasants, and you see a massive crucifixion scene.
Mm.
No, he's just like you say, he's just kind of a buffoon. So
Yeah.
how has he been the one? He's crucified her mom, and he's ready to wage war on the Citadel. I mean, he's killed a bunch of people here and there, but he does not seem like somebody who, he's not Rick Grimes,
No.
having been forced into tough situations. That's just not consistent with his character.
And exactly. And I just feel it feels out of place. The other thing to mention, you said there about um Furiosa, like what she like. Yeah. One of the things that I noted from when we didn't I think we touched on it, but one of the things that's noted in Fury Road is she sees saving the women of the harem as a redemption. For her, it's sort of like this is my last ditch. Like I'm almost unsavable, but I can save these. I can save these sort of like these figures of purity or whatever. Um, but we've got to the end of Furiosa pretty much, and I'm going cool. I'm still not entirely sure what you feel you're redeeming yourself for because throughout this film you've still been shown as a virtuous person. Yes, you've been on this revenge mission, but I've not seen you do anything that suggests that you've lost an element of your humanity or you've done this or you've done that. So I don't feel that there's any loss of humanity that needs to be redeemed by saving those people from, you know, she didn't collect them. She hasn't sort of helped Morton Joe to gather these women or
Mm-hmm.
facilitate the harem. Like it's always been about her mission of revenge. And if anything, maybe there should be something pointed out that says you've done all this to revenge yourself, but look at what you've allowed to go on in the meantime. Like you are just a part of the infrastructure of the Citadel and the tri you know city or the tri-town sort of infrastructure as a Morton Joe. Like you are
Mm-hmm.
just as responsible, kind of thing. I don't know. It
Yeah,
feels
that's a very good point,
yeah, it
right? I
feels
mean,
very airy fairy.
you should have a scene where, as part of her rising in the hierarchy, which I don't think is really depicted at all, she would have to kill one of those peasants beneath the
Mm.
citadel, right? They're encroaching on the wool rig or whatever, right? And she's got to strike one down. She doesn't even like sacrifice a war boy in the raids to just like, sorry, can't save everybody. She is. This is not the same character.
No, yeah, yeah. So I don't know because we then get the final point of well, what revenge does she take on Dementus? And is it that she just shot him in the back of the head? Is it that she rode off and dragged him along in the sand? Is it this? Is it that? Or is it that she took him back to the Citadel and grew a peach tree out of his balls? Which,
Which is strange.
well, all right, it's poetic, but again, you say about the timescale. That tree has to grow. In order to fruit. So that's several years, I'm assuming, since between the end of Furiosa and the end stinger, which is the start of Fury Road, as it were. But I want to come to this point, like, she has that peach, and you see the sort of the women being taken out to the rig. Because the new war rig has to be built as well, the war rig that we recognize from Fury Road as well. So
This was another one of my objections is
yeah.
how much time they show. They have a montage building the
Mhm.
first war rig. It is a big fucking deal.
Oh
right?
yeah.
So how much time passes between the end of this movie? You talk about like the tree would have to grow. There's a legend about how she defeated Dementus. Okay, but it seems like no time passes at all. Clearly, okay, you have to build a new war rig.
Yeah. Have to
Furiosa has just
rebuild Bullet Farm.
right, exactly. Bullet Farm's destroyed. You have to create a new system of hierarchy of him installing people in charge of Bullet Farm and
Hmm.
Gastown. They have to be really comfortable with that hierarchy because they're talking back to him in Fury Road.
Yeah.
Um, so and also like presumably all the war boys are dead
Yeah.
because there's this little team of 5 people out in the desert. Is all that's left of it. I mean, and the arm is new, and through all of this, Max has been standing on a cliff.
Yeah. This is where, again, this just want to come back to the passing of time in this film is all over the place. Like it's not depicted. However, forget the Max cameo, which I think is again a mistake. But one of the things that we've noted and we've talked about in the past, especially with regards to 2 and 3, is this idea of storytelling. Because this first, this film very much like Road Warrior, which is why I feel again it feels very much akin to Road Warrior and Thunderdome. Is the film open? The first person you see in this film is the History Man, with all the things tattooed on him and all of his clothes, and it ends with him saying, "And we know, oh, well, we don't really know what revenge she took, da da, but legend says that he's up in the top of the citadel. There is this peach tree, da da." So there is still this element or potentiality of all of this is crap. That all of this is just what the history man is telling us. This is the story that's been told of Furiosa. And I don't know how true it is. The history man, this is what the history man has depicted or has recorded of Furiosa. And that's, so that's why there's gaps maybe or whatever. However you want to do it. So how trustworthy is the narrative? Because we said that about about Max, and that being the legend. So Road Warrior could be the truth, but there's a more outlandish version that gets told out in the wastelands. And the same with Captain Walker and all that other stuff from Thunderdome, where there's like the story is told, but it gets embellished and changed and and warped and that sort of thing. And then Max becomes a part of that story to get them out to civilization as it is. So is the story of Furiosa being told in retrospect, having followed the rebellion of, Fury Road? Maybe, that I can think you could tell. But again, even with that, we get a coherent story in Road Warrior where you go like, oh no, but all these other things sort of hang together. So I'm throwing it out there that the history man is telling a story, but it still is an excuse for some of the gaping holes that exist in the narrative of this film.
Yeah, I thought about that idea with a storyteller, and we've talked about that on previous episodes with Mad Max.
Yep.
I like that idea. I think we both like that
Yeah,
legend
yeah.
of the wasteland kind of idea. It also plays into the idea that maybe, it's a different character in four than in
Mm.
one, two, and three. I like that idea, but this movie doesn't do that. It
No.
just doesn't do that. So, like, the way this, if you're going to do a prequel, so, unless you're doing like, Rogue One, which leads so well into
Hmm.
A New Hope,
Hmm.
right? It's very hard to do that well. If you're going to do a prequel, you have to tell its own story. And this
Yes.
almost does that. And so the end that this needs to have, given what you're saying about the storyteller, is it needs to then cut to her being, the Charlize Theron kind of Imperator in Fury Road, where she is like the right hand man, trusted completely. Imperator Joe could even say, like, she saved us,
Yeah.
from that ruse, right? And where you see her making tough decisions, pushing the peasants away, running the war rig herself, being the, you could do this in a montage where it's like, oh, she has ascended to the
Mm.
heights of the Citadel, and that is the story over the course of this movie. But maybe she sees a glimmer of the wives and kind of remember, and sort of wonders, what was this all for, right? This needs to be the story of the rise of Imperator
Yes.
Furiosa. And instead, it's the story of shit that happened before she
Yeah.
rescued those wives.
Yeah.
And I just think, that is such an obvious decision that you have to make this. And then this would be, you could understand the storyteller saying there are different versions, this is how we got this wonderful Imperator Furiosa. We never get any of that. And
Mm.
instead, what we get is leaning into the first movie and this truly, 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 truly painfully horrible montage of scenes from from Fury Road
Mm.
that are intercut with the credits, to just kind of remind you what happened next, as if we have just led effortlessly into that. And they're well chosen scenes, but of course, the only reason to show that would then be to have maybe a Better Call Saul little capstone at the end, where maybe this is going to have a little scene that takes place after Fury Road. Nope, not going to do that. Just, hey, remember that better movie you liked more than this? It's really painful.
Yes, it's such a bad choice.
And what I learned from that is, if this leads directly into that, in the maybe 2 months prior to Fury Road, Furiosa was totally unknown. There was a 40-day war that exhausted all the supplies. Max has been hanging out on a cliff. That arm that she's got in Fury Road, that was brand new.
Hmm.
All of the respect she had in Fury Road, that was brand new. All those war boys are brand new. The war rig's brand new. The whole system of the three towns and how they, have a delicate alliance. All of that was brand spanking new at the beginning of Fury Road. This diminishes Fury Road as a
Yeah.
result.
No, yeah, it does in that sense. But I'm like, if you ignore it, Fury Road is still a fantastic film. Um, what this reminded me of, and we'll wrap up in a
Mm-hmm.
second about this because I think we've come to the end. We'll do some final thoughts briefly. But what the other thing this reminded me of is biopics or biopics. You know, when you get these things, and it made me think of a couple of good ones and bad ones, where they'll be like, oh, we're going to focus in on one thing. So like the film like Ali says, okay, we're going to narrow this down to a 10-year period, right? We're not going to try to do his childhood, we're just going to do this 10-year period. And then you do like others will be like, oh, we're going to do the entire, Elvis, with the last Elvis one that's sort of like, we're going to cover everything. And you go, cool. But then much like in Furiosa, as in that film, you completely lose track of the timescales. You're like, okay, well, what year was that happening? How long was that between that? All of a sudden, Elvis has got big mutton chops and he's gaining weight. And you go, oh Christ, we must be in the late 60s and we're doing this. And it's like the ability to judge time in those things is really difficult. And I feel that happens with this, where I often find that I think of biopics or biopics as perfunctory. I do the same thing where I'm like, oh, when people know this character, these are the people that were important in their life or the events that were important in their life. We have to cover those. So it becomes like a series of vignettes of certain things that happened. Kind of feels like that with Furiosa. where it's not a a tragic play of how a young girl became the imperator of the Citadel and sort of one of Immortan Joe's finest road warriors, and then has to and finds it, becomes comes to a realization of I have to do this to redeem myself and bring down Immortan Joe. It just becomes, yeah, as you said, here's a series of things that happen that kind of come together to sort of form how she got to this position. But there's massive gaps in it. We're not going to cover the lessons she learned of how she became a road warrior. We're not going to cover the war. It's almost like if you took can you imagine taking um Game of Thrones and sort of going, right, I'm going to give you episodes 1, 3, 7 of the first series, and then I'm going to make you watch 2, 5, and 7 of season 2. Like, that's what it is, isn't it? It's like I'm going to give you snippets, but you're not getting the whole show, and you go, all right. It kind of feels like this should have been either either cut out a bunch of stuff, simplify the origin or something, or I don't know, make it longer and do, if you want to go into the whole lore and everything else, do a show. This could have been 8 hours, and you could have done loads of amazing things of world building in the Mad Max world.
Yeah, I agree completely. Watching this, I was thinking about our past discussions and about how we want more Mad Max kind of side quels, kind of, connective tissue, whatever. And I thought, am I a hypocrite? Because now I'm finally getting some Mad Max continuity,
Yeah.
and I don't like it that much. And all I have are complaints that it doesn't really match. I mean, that's my major complaints. I mean, if you're gonna bother doing this, there are things you have to get right? And this just doesn't. It doesn't care. It does do those kind of check boxes, but it just makes poor decisions again and again. And again, it's not a bad movie. I think this is a good movie. God, I prefer this to 99% of the stuff in theaters. All I've done is rag on this, but no, it's a fine movie. It is perfectly adequate. It is still better than the weak installments of most other franchise. It is one of the weaker installments, though.
Yes.
But I thought about that element of continuity, and I thought, okay, this is establishing more of how like the wasteland, or at least a big chunk of the wasteland, works than the past films. And I would love to see it sort of in my head canon, although I can't stand that the green place is different between the two films. But in my head canon, like the green place of this one is the Lost Boys Little Valley from Mad Max 3. And also Gastown is what happened to that little gas place in Mad Max 2.
Yes. Yeah.
It got built up, and but it's a very similar design. Clearly, like the Bartertown isn't in this because it's got that cliff face and everything, but it's like, oh, we're starting to kind of like have this connective tissue and all of that. It feels like it's establishing that continuity. But what I think is lost is that emphasis on stories. Like if I want that, and I do, if I want the story of the feral kid deciding to, he's lost everything and he decides to head out and get an interceptor and become, Mad Max and continue the legend. I'd love to see that story. That needs to start as he's like losing everyone or shortly before. And, you need to see that story. It doesn't need to tell the 20 years in between, starting with, the end of Mad Max 2. So, this kind of overly filling in the gaps, and in the end creating more gaps and more problems is what I object to.
Yeah, no, I agree. My final thoughts really on this is exactly yours. I actually, we have ragged on this, but I think because when it's doing the action, I actually really like the action in this. I think it looks great. I think it does hark back to Road Warrior in some of the way that it's been shot. The speeding up, slowing down, the zooming in on certain, on faces and stuff in the cabins and all this other stuff. I think the 15-minute scene of the attack on the original war rig is really good. It's when it focuses on the drama, or when it tries to focus on the actual sort of like this story, it does it sort of it introduces more questions than it's trying to answer. It's almost like, oh, we're going to give you all this backstory, but the backstory of Furiosa is kind of boring, in all honesty. Like, oh, she did this, it was kind of easy. She then pretended to be a boy, kind of easy. She then became this, and she was accepted. She just became really cool with Jack, kind of easy. Like, it never feels like a struggle, you know. There's so much missing, and I'm just like, oh, okay, well, Dementus is kind of like all over the place. I never find him hugely threatening beyond that first scene. It, it all feels like exactly perfunctory. And one of the things I think about, and I'm going to be careful how I word this, is the fact that this, Fury Road felt like the last effort of a guy that was like, this might be my last film. I've done all these things. There's not, they may not let me go. We've fought for years to make this. I'm going all out. Fury Road was a sort of like, I'm going out in a ball of gasoline. You know what I mean? A flaming ball of gasoline. I'm going to be crazy with it. And everyone loved it. And then they've turned to George Miller and gone, Paul, it's going to take a few years to put this together, but we're still going to do Furiosa. And you get someone, in their late 70s directing this film and pulling this together. And it feels a bit like that's not so much the spark has gone, but like that there's an energy missing from this. And it feels like it should be epic. Like it could be a Ben-Hur or, Cleopatra, like one of those massive epic kind of, sword and sandal kind of epic films they did in the 60s. Like you could do something like that. But it never has the spark. It never has that sort of energy that I expect to see from all of the Mad Max films. Every single Mad Max film has a certain type of energy, slightly different in each one, but like this kind of is missing it, and it feels older in that sense, but not more assured. And I just feel like it feels dulled because of it. Now, it's not to say it's a bad film. It's still, like you say, a very good film, and I really did enjoy it in the watching. But because this is supposed to be answering questions and providing that sort of lore and stuff, when you take a step back, even the moment I left, I took a step back and you start to question it, you go, huh, this has kind of made things worse. Like, either do it and be tight or don't do it at all. And I still think this suffers from all the problems of all the prequels I've said before. Everything from Wolverine getting his leather jacket to Han Solo getting his bloody name, which infuriates me. But yeah, I think that's just the way it goes. It's kind of a shame that this is how, this franchise may go out. But do you think that there's more to come? I honestly don't think there's any more from George Miller. I think this is it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine given the box office. I mean, really, Fury Road was not a fantastic hit. I mean, it
Mm,
was did decently, but this did, this looks like it's on track to do half of that or so. We'll see. But I can't imagine they greenlight another 150 to
no.
200 million dollar
Well,
movie after this.
just so you know, budget wise, on paper, it's quoted as being 170 million, no, 180 million. That's what the studios and stuff put up. In order for them to film in Australia, they were also put up a bunch of other money by the government of Australia. So apparently this was closer to 210 to 220 million.
No. Well, I mean, if Mad Max has a future, I mean, don't count any of these franchises out.
No,
Look, the comparison's been made between this and Ghostbusters as kind of like the 80s nostalgia is fading,
done. Yeah, it's done.
And not everything deserves to be a long-running franchise forever. All of these will be back in some form, whether it'll be on TV or streaming or whatever. Everything will come back, or a lower budget thing, or the next director, we'll get something else at some point. But
Yeah.
I'm a little dubious as to whether or not we get the Wasteland, which would tell us what Mad Max was doing in the year prior to Fury Road.
So
I guess we need that.
just stood there. He didn't do much. He just stood on that cliff face for a year, apparently. Yes. No, that's fine. Yeah, we shall see. You're right. You never count these things out. But for us, at least, we are out of the wastelands, or at least we're out of these wastelands. We are leaving the Australian outback. Oh, actually, Kind of, because we're going to be back to Australia.
That's true.
Yeah. We will be back to Australia, but not in a wasteland kind of way. But our post-apocalyptic journeys do continue. But this was a franchise review, and now we're going to be popping back in time, and we're going to be starting at a much earlier point, actually on the beach in the 50s. So we are back in Australia, and our post-apocalyptic season through from the 50s up to sort of more recent films starts on the next episode. So yeah, go check it out. There'll be much, much more. I hope you've enjoyed this Mad Max retrospective. But if you are liking this, couple of things. Don't forget to leave a review on your podcast catcher. Always make sure you sort of, happy to receive the feedback. And go check out the Patreon. On the Patreon, we have got Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. We've done a whole, but we've done, I'm pretty much all done, I think, by the time this comes out. We've done very much almost all the 5 seasons. If we haven't, they will be done soon. But you've got 5 seasons worth of Twilight Zone, me doing 30-minute thoughts, and a series of other things as well. But also, we also did side episodes in previous seasons. We did some episodes. We talked about short films, alternate versions of films. So that's all, and we are going to be continuing that. So throughout this season, you are going to be getting, I believe it's 10 extra Patreon exclusive films that will include I Am Legend, another version of On the Beach from the 2000s. What else is there?
Quatermass.
Quatermass, the Quatermass conclusion.
Flesh and the Devil.
Yes.
Last Battle, Threads. How comes to Frogtown? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oblivion.
So they will be absolutely fantastic. They're going to be our Patreon exclusives. We'll be advertising them all over the place. So go check it out. Links down below. That's patreon.com/20CG Media. But yeah, go check it out. But for now, Julian, thank you very much for joining me in the Wastelands.
Thank you, Scott. I've loved talking about Mad Max. It is a lot of fun for me. Yeah,
no, this has been great, and we might we'll see. There'll be another franchise sort of special. I think at some point after this season, we'll think about it again. But yeah, but for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.